Upon hearing that my close friend, Dean, had been suddenly hospitalized, I rushed to the hospital to check on her. In the hospital room, Dean appeared utterly gaunt. She refused to speak to anyone, simply burying her face in the blankets and sobbing uncontrollably. Lucas, Dean's husband, walked me downstairs and began to open up about the bizarre events that had plagued their family. It all began with a house they had recently purchased. Although it was an old property, the previous owner had barely lived there, leaving the furniture in pristine condition. When he first found the listing online, Lucas was struck by the unexpectedly low price compared to its actual market value. Upon making contact, he learned the owner needed an urgent sale to move abroad and was even willing to leave all the furniture behind. The transaction proceeded quickly and smoothly, with both parties soon finalizing the contract exactly as planned. However, Dean felt something was amiss. She didn't believe in such windfalls from the sky and expressed her lingering concerns to her husband. Lucas reassured his wife that the project was built by a reputable developer with an excellent standing, so there couldn't be any issues. Lowering his voice, he asserted that he had done thorough research. No one had ever died in the house, and the previous owner's background was completely clean. Hearing her husband's detailed explanation, the anxiety in Dean's heart eased somewhat. Within just 1 week, all the title transfer and tax procedures were completed without a hitch. On the day they moved into their new nest, the couple couldn't hide their joy at finally escaping the endless cycle of renting. As they stepped into the master bedroom, their eyes were immediately drawn to the massive bed standing prominently in the center of the room. The bed wasn't flashy, but it possessed a classic antique charm with intricate carvings and great elegance. They began organizing their belongings in the closet and together spread a brand new set of linens over the old bed. Both worked tirelessly to clean every nook and cranny. The house, already fresh, now felt more beautiful and cozy than ever. It wasn't until 8 o'clock in the evening that the cleaning was truly finished to their mutual satisfaction. After a simple dinner, Lucas lay on the bed relaxing with his phone, while Dean sat at the vanity performing her skincare routine before sleep. While opening a jar of moisturizer, she accidentally let the lid slip from her hand, and it fell to the floor. The round lid rolled across the ground and vanished into the dark void beneath the bed. Dean frowned slightly. She bent down and reached into the darkness under the bed to retrieve the small item. Suddenly, her hand brushed against something cold and strangely slimy. A chill ran down her spine as she realized with horror that the object she had just touched was a human hand. Terrified, Dean let out a piercing scream. She quickly recoiled and tumbled backward. Hearing the commotion, Lucas sat up abruptly to check on her, half joking if there was a mouse hiding under there. Her whole body trembling, Dean pointed toward the space under the bed, stammering to her husband that there was a hand underneath. Lucas laughed at his wife's fear, asserting that he had just cleaned that area earlier that afternoon, so it was impossible. However, wanting to put his wife's mind at ease, he grabbed the flashlight and approached to investigate the truth for himself. The flashlight illuminated every corner. The space under the bed was completely empty, with only the jar lid lying silently on the clean floor. Lucas picked up the lid, handed it to his wife, and smiled, teasing her about her overactive imagination. Seeing his wife still in a daze, He gently comforted her, suggesting that work pressure might be causing hallucinations, and advised her to go to bed early. Dean stared at her hand. Despite trying to reassure herself, the cold, visceral sensation from earlier still haunted her mind. 3 days later, when Lucas had to work overtime and returned home late, Dean had to go to sleep alone in the quiet room. In the dead of night, while she was fast asleep, she suddenly felt a strange pushing force from beneath the mattress. The once flat mattress became unusually lumpy right under her back, making it impossible for her to rest peacefully. That force was so strong that it felt as though it was lifting her entire body off the bed in the pitch black night. A raspy, ominous voice whispered close to her ear, ordering her to leave the bed immediately. Dean snapped awake. In utter panic, she used all her strength to sit up, threw off the blanket, and bolted from the bed. She rushed to the door, standing frozen and looking back at the bed, her face completely drained of color. Under the dim light, she saw with horror the distinct silhouette of someone lying beneath the blanket. Memories of the cold hand from a few days ago flooded back. She realized her fear was real. Someone was indeed in the room. Not daring to hesitate any longer, she ran to the living room, trembling as she called Lucas, sobbing and begging him to come home immediately. Fortunately, Lucas had just finished work and reached the apartment gate. He quickly reassured his wife over the phone. As soon as she saw her husband step into the house, Dean lunged at him and embraced him, crying and insisting that none of it was a hallucination. Lucas still didn't understand what was happening. He could only hold his wife, gently stroking her, shaking back to help her calm down. He went into the bedroom once more to check thoroughly under the bed, but still found nothing unusual. On the bed, the linens were disheveled exactly as they were when Dean had fled in panic. But there was absolutely no sign of a third person. Seeing that his wife was severely traumatized, Lucas decided to let her sleep temporarily in the living room to escape the terror of the bedroom. He even went so far as to invite a shaman to perform a ritual and paste a sealing talisman directly onto the master bedroom door. From then on, the strange occurrences indeed stopped. But Dean's excitement for the new house had completely vanished. Time passed quietly. One weekend, Lucas was still engrossed in his work for foreign clients on his computer. Dean, naturally meticulous about cleanliness, began deep cleaning the living room and surrounding areas. While working in the hallway, a pungent smell of rusty iron suddenly hit her, forcing her to stop. Following that unpleasant scent, her footsteps stopped right in front of the bedroom door that had been sealed for so long. She told herself that perhaps the humid weather had caused metal objects inside to rust, a normal occurrence for a room kept closed for too long. Gathering her courage, Dean pushed the door open and stepped in, believing that in broad daylight, nothing dangerous could possibly happen. The room was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the weak light filtering through the gaps in the curtains created a bone-chillingly gloomy atmosphere. Although she felt uneasy, she began mopping the floor, wanting to finish the task quickly and leave. The floor and furniture had been wiped down, but the pungent smell of rusty iron did not fade. It grew even more suffocating. Her eyes rested on the only area that hadn't been touched, the dark void under the bed. Not having enough courage to crawl under, she stood at a distance, thrusting the mop under the bed and sweeping it around perfunctorily. As she prepared to pull the mop out, she felt a powerful force gripping the handle, and a hideous hand gradually emerged. That hand was riddled with sores and decay, and it was the source of the horrific rusty smell permeating the room. Dean collapsed to the ground, her breathing becoming rapid. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt constricted, unable to make a sound. From her position on the floor, she saw clearly a pale, ghostly face staring intently at her from under the bed. That horrific entity began to crawl out, its facial features becoming clearer and more terrifying. As it crawled, it emitted raspy growls, repeating the threatening warning that she was not allowed to sleep on that bed. In the final moments before losing consciousness, Dean used her last bit of strength to cry out Lucas's name for help. That cry for help marked the moment her strength was completely exhausted. Darkness enveloped her vision as she fainted on the floor. After taking his wife to the hospital, Lucas was heartbroken to see her fall into a state of severe panic. She would cry bitterly whenever she saw a stranger. He never stopped blaming himself for being too dismissive and not taking his wife's early warning seriously. Witnessing Dean's pitiful situation, I could only remain silent and hope for her speedy recovery. For now, peace and quiet were her best medicine. Later, Lucas moved his wife out of that haunted house to live in Dean's hometown, where her spirit gradually began to stabilize. Lucas was certain the bed was the source of all the misfortune, so he spent a large sum of money to have a shaman thoroughly dispose of the item. Rumor has it that the entity dwelling under that bed was extremely malevolent, perhaps a soul carrying a resentment that reached the heavens before death. As for the house, Lucas listed it for sale online. With today's active market, it will likely soon belong to a new owner who remains unaware of the chilling past within. My uncle didn't have much education and worked hard his whole life without earning much. He had to save diligently to send his 2 children to university. Despite the difficulties, both of his children became successful, landing good jobs in the big city and living stable lives. My cousin advised my uncle several times to stop working. It was time to rest and enjoy his later years. He was even planning to bring my uncle and aunt to the city next month. But my uncle was the kind of person who got restless if he wasn't busy. He refused, saying he'd probably die of boredom in the city. The last time he stayed for a month, he nearly fell ill. Even in his 50s, my uncle was very strong. He could carry a bag of cement up and down stairs without even panting. Everyone, including my aunt, didn't want to stop him, only advising him to quit the heavy labor and find something lighter. Suddenly, a few days ago, my mother called to say my uncle was gravely ill. This shocked me. I quickly asked, "How can he be sick? He's always been so healthy." The next day, I bought some nutritional supplements and fruit and went to visit him, still feeling that something was very strange. The moment I saw him, I gasped in disbelief. I blurted out, "Uncle, why are you so thin?" My uncle, who had always been a large, robust man, was now lying in bed, his frame having shrunk considerably. His eyes were sunken and lifeless, his face ashen like old tree bark. It was clearly a serious illness. Seeing me, he whispered weakly, "You came to visit?" When my aunt saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. She said they couldn't find the cause of his illness and that, "Your uncle has definitely run into something unclean. The doctors can't find anything wrong with him." Hearing this, my uncle shot my aunt a look, then struggled to sit up. "Come, nephew," he said, Sit here and talk with me." My uncle told me he was working at a paper tube factory. His main job was escorting goods. Escorting goods meant riding with the factory's driver to make deliveries, then being responsible for unloading the cargo at the destination. The driver's name was Zhang Lam, but everyone called him Old Zhang. He and my uncle were around the same age and got along well, which made the long trips less boring. About a month ago, the factory received an order, but it was a long way off, a half-day's drive. The dispatcher said the customer needed it urgently and requested they set off early. Old Zhang, worried about daytime traffic, suggested to my uncle that they make the delivery at night. My uncle thought it was reasonable and agreed. This wasn't their first night delivery. In fact, they preferred driving at night because there were fewer cars and the roads were better. The two friends chatted and laughed as they drove. When they started talking about their children, they became even more animated, talking non-stop. The long drive was less dull. After getting off the highway, Old Zhang checked the fuel gauge and saw the tank was almost empty. He was a bit worried. He had forgotten to refuel before they loaded the cargo. Luckily, just as they were wondering what to do, they saw a gas station by the side of the road. Old Zhang quickly pulled in. In the middle of the night, the roads were deserted and the gas station was empty, lit only by a few flickering, dim yellow lights. Old Zhang parked the truck and looked around, but he couldn't see any attendants. Strange, he wondered. Why is there nobody here? He then shouted, "Hello?" a few more times, but there was still no response. After a moment, with still no sign of an attendant, my uncle clapped Old Zhang on the shoulder and said, "Stop shouting. I'll get out and look." Old Zhang figured that with so few cars at night, the attendant was probably napping in the break room inside the convenience store and told my uncle to check in there. My uncle deftly hopped out of the truck and walked towards the convenience store. This gas station had 3 rows of pumps. As my uncle walked past the 3rd row, he suddenly saw someone. Judging by the uniform, it was clearly a station attendant. She must have been hidden by the pump before, which was why they hadn't seen her. My uncle was about to walk over and say something, but he stopped in his tracks, feeling that something was very wrong. The woman was muttering something, but there was absolutely nothing in front of her. Even stranger, the fuel nozzle in her hand was gushing gasoline, which wasn't normal. The gas was pouring onto the ground, soaking a large patch. It was clear she hadn't just started, but had been doing this for some time. Who is she talking to? My uncle thought. Could there be a car I can't see? The thought made him involuntarily take a step back. Just then, the attendant seemed to notice my uncle. She looked over at him. Then she waved at him, signaling for him to wait a moment, that she would be over to help him after she was finished. By this point, my uncle was scared enough to pee his pants. He gave an awkward nod and hurried back to the truck. Back in the cab, Old Zhang saw his pale face and asked, "What's wrong? Did you find the attendant?" My uncle stammered out what he had just seen, saying, "I found her, but I don't know who she's pumping gas for." Old Zhang's expression changed instantly. Having driven for many years, he'd seen his share of strange things. His experience told him that in a situation like this, running was the best policy. His voice urgent, Old Zhang told my uncle, "We can't stay here. We have to go, now," and prepared to start the engine. But when my uncle saw Old Zhang was about to leave, He objected. He didn't want to just abandon the attendant. My uncle was a warm-hearted man by nature, and leaving without a word just wasn't his style. Even if we're going, we should at least tell her. With that, my uncle opened the truck door, jumped out, and called back, "Wait for me, I'll be right back." Old Zhang's face darkened. He cursed my uncle for being a busybody but didn't feel right driving off alone. He could only wait in the truck, ready to floor it at the first sign of trouble. Just then, the female attendant came running over to meet my uncle. She quickly greeted him and apologized, explaining that she had been talking to another driver and hadn't noticed their truck pull in. Hearing this, my uncle quickly pulled her aside. "You just ran into a ghost," he said urgently. He pushed her toward the truck. "There's no time to waste," he urged. "You need to leave with us right now before something else happens." The attendant saw the serious look on his face, realized he wasn't joking, and also grew tense. What ghost?" she stammered. Then she remembered the car she had just served. Suddenly, the attendant began to rummage through her pockets, looking for something. She had just taken cash from that car. She had to check it. With that, she pulled a banknote from her pocket, saying, "This is the cash he just gave me." But in an instant, both of them froze. The banknote, which had looked normal, had transformed into Joss paper hell money. Only then did the girl realize the gravity of the situation. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her eyes darted around in confusion. She stammered, starting to believe what my uncle had said. Then she turned to my uncle, her eyes pleading, and asked him to go with her to check the security cameras. If this really happened, she had to explain it to her boss. My uncle, being soft-hearted and still not entirely convinced, also wanted to verify it for himself. Checking the camera was the most direct way. He agreed, telling her to lead the way to the camera room. The two of them immediately headed for the gas station's monitoring room. The path was dark, lit only by a few dim, flickering lights. As they were walking down the hallway, my uncle suddenly stopped, having realized something. His face turned pale, and large beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Because as they had just passed under a light, the woman cast no shadow. And her feet were floating above the ground, her form blurry and indistinct. At that moment, the woman, noticing he had stopped, also stopped, but she did not turn around. Her voice became strange, dropping several octaves. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "The monitoring room is right up ahead." In that split second, my uncle snapped to his senses and screamed, "You damned ghost!" With that, he turned and ran for his life. A blood-curdling shriek echoed from behind him. "Don't go! Stay here with me!" My uncle glanced back as he ran. The woman's face had completely deformed. It was a twisted, rotting mass of flesh, as if it had been destroyed. My uncle didn't dare look again. He sped up, putting distance between himself and the woman, and quickly escaped the convenience store. He ran straight to the truck, yelling for old Zhang to drive, to get them out of there. Old Zhang didn't ask questions. He'd been wanting to leave for a while. He immediately turned the key, started the engine, and told my uncle to hold on. Old Zhang stomped on the gas, and the truck sped away from the gas station. Only after they had been driving for some time did my uncle finally catch his breath. He told old Zhang what had just happened, which made old Zhang break out in a cold sweat. This ghost had used a trick within a trick. It was unbelievable. My uncle's face was grim as he replayed the events. "You know," he said, "I think that ghost, she might not even know she's dead." After that, they both fell silent. They didn't say another word for the rest of the drive, both clearly shaken by the night's events. 3 days later, old Jung and my uncle went out for another delivery, but this time during the day. A local they passed by mentioned that half a month ago, this very gas station had caught fire and exploded while refueling a car. A female attendant and the driver in the car had both been burned to death on the spot. After that, my uncle suddenly fell ill and became bedridden. As I left my uncle's house, I specifically told my aunt to find a shaman to take a look at him. My aunt seemed helpless. She said my uncle was just too stubborn. "He won't let me find anyone," she said, "which is why it's dragged on this long." This horror story was told to me by my uncle, Kane. He was a machine repairman at the textile factory in town and often had to inspect machinery at midnight. Because he frequently traveled at night, Uncle Kane encountered many strange things. Today, he promised to tell me a ghost story by the Nine Dragons River. This was something he personally witnessed, and even recalling it now still fills him with fear. It happened about 30 years ago, around 9 p.m. Uncle Kane had just finished his shift and was riding his bicycle home. At this hour, the streets should have been deserted, yet from afar, he could hear a commotion and see flashing lights. As he pedaled closer, he saw a large crowd gathered by the riverbank. It was bustling with activity. Both police cars and ambulances were present. He parked his bicycle to the side and squeezed into the crowd to see what had happened. From a distance, Uncle Kane saw doctors trying to resuscitate a woman lying on the ground. The doctors were performing chest compressions, clearly doing their best to save her. From the murmurs around him, Uncle Kane understood that this woman had jumped into the river to end her life. Fortunately, someone passing by had noticed and immediately called an ambulance and the police. But in the end, the doctors gave up and declared her dead. Several people lifted her onto a stretcher, covering her face with a cloth, preparing to transport her to the hospital. As the stretcher passed by Uncle Kane, a sudden gust of wind blew away the cloth covering her face. Not only Uncle Kane, but also the surrounding crowd widened their eyes in astonishment. The woman's face was revealed. Although pale and bloodless, it could not hide the stunning beauty she must have had when she was alive. In that moment, an inappropriate thought flashed through Uncle Kane's mind. He found himself thinking that if he could marry such a beautiful woman, it would be wonderful. After that, the woman's body was taken away, and the crowd gradually dispersed. However, after returning home, Uncle Kane lay restless in bed, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the pale yet delicate face of the woman appeared in his mind, haunting him. A week passed, and it was Uncle Kane's turn for the night shift again. When he overheard his colleagues discussing the drowned woman, he immediately joined in to listen. They said that the woman had jumped into the river after being abandoned by her boyfriend. They had been deeply in love for many years, but in pursuit of an opportunity to go abroad, the man had quickly married someone else. Betrayed, the woman fell into deep depression. Unable to bear the pain, she took her own life. His colleagues also mentioned that ever since that night, whenever someone passed by that section of the river, they would often see a woman sitting by the river, crying. Some even claimed to have heard heartbreaking sobs in the dead of night. Some had even seen her terrifying face clearly. People said her resentment was too strong and that she might haunt any unlucky passerby. Gradually, everyone started avoiding that riverside road at night. That day, the factory manager treated everyone to dinner, and they drank a little too much. Worried that Uncle Cain wouldn't be able to get home safely, the manager asked Jack, a security guard, to escort him back. As they neared the river, Jack warned Uncle Cain to take a detour, as strange occurrences had been happening there lately. Uncle Cain scoffed at Jack, mocking him for working in security yet believing in ghosts. Clearly drunk, he ignored the warning and stubbornly pedaled straight ahead. Unable to change Uncle Cain's mind, Jack had no choice but to follow him. As they approached the Nine Dragons River, Uncle Cain felt an eerie cold wind blowing against his back. The wind whistled past his ears, sounding like someone weeping. Thanks to the alcohol, Uncle Cain wasn't scared, but Jack beside him had already turned pale with fear. Uncle Cain tried to ignore the howling wind, but strangely, his bicycle felt heavier with each pedal. Thinking the tire might be deflating, he stopped to check, but the tires were perfectly fine. Jack also knelt down to inspect them, but there was nothing wrong. They had no choice but to continue cycling. However, this time, the bike felt even heavier than before. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, Uncle Cain turned to look behind him. There was a long trail of water stretching from where he had ridden. A chill ran through Uncle Cain's spine, and the alcohol instantly wore off, leaving him completely sober. He realized he had definitely encountered something unnatural. Jack noticed the horror on Uncle Cain's face and called out to him, but Uncle Cain didn't respond. He just pedaled furiously forward, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. At that moment, he suddenly felt a cold, icy breeze rushing to his chest. Looking down, Uncle Cain was horrified to discover a handprint on his chest, a cold, wet mark. Immediately, the coldness from the handprint spread throughout his body, enveloping him in a shivering chill. Even more terrifying, his arms and legs suddenly stiffened, no longer responding to his control. He felt as if an invisible force was controlling the bicycle. It was automatically heading straight toward the river. Uncle Cain exerted all his strength to steer the bicycle, trying to turn the handlebars to avoid plunging into the river. He used all his might to control the handlebars, trying to keep the bicycle running parallel to the riverbank. But just then, when he looked down at the water's surface, he was shocked to discover. In the reflection in the water, a disheveled woman was sitting behind him on the bike. To his surprise, there really was a woman, soaked to the bone, sitting on the back seat. Suddenly, her head twisted sideways, her messy hair parted, revealing a creepy, chilling smile. Uncle Cain's face turned pale, his whole body stiffened, and he completely lost consciousness. The bicycle slid into the river. Jack witnessed the entire scene, momentarily frozen, unable to move. After regaining his senses, Jack immediately rushed to the riverbank. There, he saw that Uncle Cain's head and neck were the only parts above the water. The rest of his body was submerged. At this point, Uncle Cain's face was deathly pale, his mouth frothing as if he had completely lost consciousness. However, his hands were still gripping the grass on the riverbank, desperately clinging to a glimmer of hope for survival. Jack quickly reached out to pull Uncle Cain up, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't budge him. Uncle Cain continued sinking until even his neck was no longer visible. Jack noticed strange ripples in the water around Uncle Cain, and right in front of him a long strand of hair was floating on the water's surface. That's when he realized the thing below was pulling Uncle Cain down, preventing him from using his strength to pull him up. In panic, Jack quickly grabbed a stone from the shore and threw it forcefully into the water. The figure underwater immediately stopped pulling Uncle Cain. A woman's wet head surfaced from the water. As her upper body emerged, her face and neck were covered in horrifying decayed wounds. She stared at Jack, as if she wanted to devour him alive. Jack, terrified, was paralyzed with fear, closed his eyes, and ran for his life toward the shore. Jack ran for his life back to the town to find help. Breathing heavily, exhausted, he collapsed on the ground, gasping for air and calling for help from passers-by. Later, Jack led a group of people back to the riverbank, only to find Uncle Cain unconscious, collapsed right there. After being rescued and taken home, Uncle Cain remained unconscious for a full day and night and fell seriously ill. It took a long time for him to gradually recover his health.
This is a true story of mine. Although I've told it to other people, not many have believed me. Today, I will tell it one more time. In July 2017, my colleague Mia had a birthday. We raised our glasses together to celebrate her new year. A few close friends from the company celebrated her birthday. Everyone was happy and the atmosphere was very lively. After
Cheers.
the meal, not yet satisfied, we went to a karaoke bar to sing. There, we drank a lot of alcohol and the party became even more exciting. The most enthusiastic person was probably Jang. He had been pursuing Mia for a long time and dedicated a song to her, not hiding his feelings at all. Because I had a bit of alcohol in me, I also became more open. I grabbed the microphone, ready to perform a song that I had loved for a long time. I chose a song called Baby One More Time. My friends cheered me on, saying I had to sing and dance to have some spirit, a playful encouragement. Perhaps seeing the intimacy between Jung and Mia, I was reminded of someone from the past, and a memory suddenly came back to me. I sang the emotional lyrics about having wasted my best years and having missed a girl. Who doesn't have a few loves when they're young? That night, we drank until after 11 o'clock. Everyone was drunk, and the atmosphere became very lively and cheerful, with no more inhibitions. After Mia's family called several times, we sang our last song, My Sugar Baby. It was a very meaningful song about friendship. The final lyrics echoed, ending a night of living life to the fullest, full of memories. When it was time to say goodbye, Jang offered to take Mia home. I knew his intention, so I didn't go with them, giving the two of them a chance. That night, I had indeed drunk a bit too much. I staggered along the empty street, my head a bit dizzy. I was no longer sober. My steps had also started to become wobbly. The drunkenness made it impossible for me to walk steadily. I could only try my best not to fall. A cold wind blew, and my stomach suddenly churned with an uncomfortable feeling. The drunkenness hit, and I could no longer hold it in. I just wanted to throw up. I tried to suppress it a few times, but I couldn't. The nausea grew more and more intense. It was unbearable. I felt I was about to throw up. I quickly ran forward, looking for a secluded place to relieve the nausea that was tormenting me. I quickly ran into a small alley by the side of the road. I leaned on the wall and began to vomit uncontrollably, feeling very uncomfortable and tired. Anyone who has been drunk enough to throw up probably knows. That taste is truly not pleasant at all, an utterly horrible and haunting feeling. My nose and mouth were filled with the things I had just vomited. It was both uncomfortable and disgusting. I threw up a few times before I felt a little better. After I was done throwing up, my stomach felt much better. Just then, someone bumped into my shoulder and walked past me. He was probably also a drunk person. I watched the person stagger into the alley. I didn't know if he was going home or looking for a place to relieve himself. He looked very suspicious. I was too lazy to care. I turned around, intending to go back to the main road to catch a taxi and go home to rest after an exhausting night. I planned to catch a taxi home. However, before I could even get out of the alley, a strange thing happened, which sent a shiver down my spine. I was walking when, suddenly, I felt a gigantic black shadow glide over my head without a sound. This made me feel very strange. I was in a small alley. How could something create such a large black shadow? When I looked up, the black shadow had disappeared without a trace. All that remained was the night sky and clothes hanging on a line, which was very strange. Just then, I heard a thud from inside the alley. It sounded like something had fallen to the ground. It was very suspicious. At that moment, I don't know why I wanted to go back and check. I only remember that some invisible force urged me to go back, even though I felt this had nothing to do with me. Yet I felt compelled to find out what had made that sound. When I got to the corner of the alley and looked inside, I saw a horrifying sight, something I couldn't believe. In the alley, there was a person standing there. I couldn't say for sure if it was a person or not. I only knew that it was about 3 meters tall, which was very scary. And on the ground in front of it, a person was lying there. This sight sent shivers down my spine, and I felt that danger was approaching. That was probably the drunk person who had bumped into me earlier. He lay there motionless. I didn't know what had happened to him. He looked very pitiful. The drunk person lay motionless on the ground. The gigantic black shadow stepped over him and bent down, as if it wanted to do something. It was very scary. The next scene scared me so much that I almost wet my pants. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was utterly horrifying. The gigantic black shadow reached out with its fingers, which were like iron hooks. It gently slashed a line on the drunk person's chest, tearing open his ribcage. After that, it reached its hand into the drunk person's stomach and pulled out a pile of something. This scene was incredibly brutal and scary. It was not for the faint of heart. It brought that thing to its mouth and began to chew voraciously, as if it were enjoying a delicious meal. Its appearance at this moment was even more frightening and gruesome. I quickly hid behind the wall. I was so scared that I had to cover my mouth with my hand, afraid that I would scream and be discovered. I was in a state of complete panic. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. The horrifying sight made it impossible for me to suppress my fear and extreme terror. After about 10 seconds, I remembered that I had to call the police. I trembled, trying to get my phone out of my pocket, my heart filled with panic. However, because I was too scared and tense, my hand slipped. My phone fell to the ground, making a loud noise, which was very dangerous. The noise attracted its attention. I was so scared that I didn't dare to move. I curled up in the corner of the wall, holding my breath, afraid that it would discover me. I held my breath waiting for about 3 to 5 minutes, but it didn't come near me. Only then did I dare to move again. I looked at the monster. It seemed it was still engrossed in its meal and hadn't paid attention to the noise I had just made. I composed myself, quickly picked up my phone, and called the police. Because I was so scared, I stammered, but luckily, the person on the other end could hear me clearly. Before long, a police car arrived. Seeing the police, I was no longer scared and quickly went out to report the incident. The police officer asked if I was the person who had called. I nodded, trying to stay calm so I could recount the entire event clearly. I stammered as I recounted the entire event I had witnessed. I pointed to the corner of the alley, saying that a monster had just eaten a person there. After hearing what I said, the police officer even pulled out his gun. He looked at me with a very skeptical look. He couldn't believe what I was saying. They told me to hide in the corner, instructing me not to come out until they had everything under control. After that, the 2 police officers held their guns and slowly entered the alley to check the situation. I hid outside the corner, my heart filled with anticipation and fear. I didn't know what they would find, and I didn't know where the monster had gone. After about 2 or 3 minutes, the 2 police officers came out. One of them used his walkie-talkie to call for an ambulance. His face was very serious. Seeing that their faces didn't look like they had just encountered a monster, I thought it had escaped. I quickly asked if they had caught it. I was very worried. However, the 2 police officers didn't answer my question. One of them just asked me to go with them to the station to give a statement. Hearing the request to go to the station, although I felt it was a hassle, I had no other choice. I had to follow them, my heart filled with confusion. When I got in the car, I saw a few people in white coats entering the alley. They were probably there to examine the body, a very haunting sight. Although I didn't want to go, I had no other choice. I had to follow them to the police station to clarify everything, my heart filled with unease. A police officer gave me a piece of paper. He asked me to write down everything I had seen tonight, truthfully and completely. I asked if the drunk person had been eaten. I wanted to know the truth. I couldn't forget that horrifying sight. However, the police officer didn't answer my question directly. He just turned back and asked me to write down everything I had seen in detail and carefully. I wrote down the entire event, from my birthday party and meeting the drunk person to seeing the 3-meter-tall monster eating a person, not missing a single detail. When I finished my statement and gave it to the 2 police officers, I hoped that they would believe what I had said and start a serious investigation into the matter. An older police officer read my statement while looking at me. His face showed a very strange expression. He couldn't believe what I had written. After reading it, they said a few things and let me go. They advised me to drink less alcohol in the future, a very meaningful piece of advice that I couldn't understand. I felt a little unwilling to leave. I still wanted to know the truth. I couldn't accept such a perfunctory explanation. I wanted to confirm what I had seen. I asked the police officer if the drunk person had his organs eaten, my heart filled with confusion. However, the police officer didn't answer my question directly. He also told me not to spread any nonsense rumors in society, which made me even more confused. Perhaps he saw my unease. He said that when they had the results of the forensic examination, he would let me know, a promise. I felt that was just a way to comfort me. I had long since sobered up after going through a horrifying night. There was no more alcohol left in me. When I left the police station, it was already past midnight. The road was deserted with no one in sight. which made me feel uneasy. On my way home, I always felt that something was following me. That feeling sent shivers down my spine. I was very scared. That night, I couldn't sleep peacefully. I had nightmares all night, dreaming of that monster trying to eat my organs. I drifted in and out of sleep until morning. A whole night of bad sleep left me feeling very tired and exhausted. Because I couldn't sleep and there was a lingering effect from the alcohol, my head was pounding. I struggled to sit up, my body feeling very heavy and tired. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, I received a phone call. It was the call I had been waiting for a long time, hoping to get an answer. It was the call from the police officer from last night. He said that the forensic report determined that the deceased was a chronic alcoholic who died of liver failure, and the body was completely intact. Everything was just a hallucination from my drunkenness. I hung up the phone and reminisced about everything. I remembered every single detail very clearly. There were no missing pieces of memory. It couldn't have been a hallucination. Does anyone know what I saw that night? I am still haunted by that question, unable to find an answer. This is a strange story from my childhood. As a child, I was very mischievous, and my mother often spanked me for being so playful and running around everywhere. This one time was no different. After dinner, I wanted to go out and play with my friends. However, my mother flatly refused, ignoring all my pleading. I secretly ran outside. Unfortunately, my mother discovered me. She grabbed a broom and chased after me, hitting me, determined not to let me go out and play. I ran straight to the main road. Seeing that she couldn't catch me, my mother put her hands on her hips and yelled after me, telling me not to come home so that the bogeyman could take me. Every time I ran out at night, I would feel a little scared. The quiet night and the empty streets always made me feel uneasy. My mother would always use the story of the bogeyman to threaten me, hoping that I would be afraid and wouldn't dare to go out. It happened every time, so I got used to it. The bogeyman was a legend in my hometown, used to scare children. Just thinking about it, I would feel a cold gust of wind blow across my back, which would make me shiver. The bogeyman was a common phrase used by adults. Whenever a child was disobedient, they would use this story to threaten them. This method seemed to be very effective. It was said that the story of the bogeyman was real, happening before the liberation, and it sowed fear in the villages. At that time, there were many mysterious disappearances in the village. The victims were all children who played outside at night, and no one knew what happened to them. The villagers all rumored that it was the bogeyman living in the village who caused it. This made the children very scared and haunted, and they didn't dare to go out at night. She would often hide in the corners of alleys at night, waiting for children to walk by. After that, she would take them away, leaving no trace behind. The children who were taken didn't even have time to scream for help. They disappeared suddenly, leaving confusion and fear throughout the village. At that time, many children in and around our village had gone missing. The villagers were all in a state of extreme panic. Some of those children could never be found again. They disappeared as if they had never existed in this world. Some children were found by their parents, but they were only cold bodies. The pain of losing a child spread throughout the village, which was very tragic and filled with resentment. The children who were found all died a very horrible death. It was said that some had their eyes gouged out, and some had their organs removed, which was very cruel and brutal. Everyone rumored that they had been taken and eaten by the bogeyman. This rumor had silently sown fear throughout the village. Therefore, as soon as it got dark, no one dared to go out. Everyone was afraid of being taken and eaten by the bogeyman, not daring to risk their lives. This matter even alarmed the police. After an investigation, the police arrested the bogeyman in an abandoned house, ending the days of fear. When the police stormed into the house, they saw a very disgusting sight. It was something no one could have imagined. It was very scary. She was eating meat from a basin. On the table and on the ground, there were bones scattered everywhere, a very brutal scene, not for the faint of heart. The police officer who participated in the arrest said that the abandoned house was filled with the smell of death, which sent shivers down people's spines. It was the smell of blood and the foul odor of decay, which made everyone who was there feel very uncomfortable and nauseous. On the table, in the basin, there was still a lot of uneaten meat. The pieces of meat looked very scary, and no one dared to get close to examine them carefully. On the ground, there was also a lot of hair. The clumps of black hair scattered everywhere made the scene even more ghostly. The police took the meat and hair for a forensic examination. However, the results showed that they were just the flesh and hair of cats and dogs, not human, as everyone had rumored. After being interrogated, the bogeyman confessed to all her crimes. She had been a child trafficker and had caused the death of a few children, an unforgivable crime. In the end, she was sentenced to death. Her crimes had caused too much suffering and tragedy. She had to face the just punishment of the law. When the execution was carried out, many villagers came to watch. They all said that her crimes were unforgivable and that she deserved to die without a shred of pity. They thought that after the bogeyman died, the village would return to peace. Everyone would no longer have to live in fear and be haunted. Everyone was very happy. Adults also relaxed their vigilance. They no longer forbade their children from going out to play at night, believing that the danger had passed. They started to allow the children to go out and play in the evening. The children, who had not been allowed to play for a long time, were now very happy to be able to play freely. However, the scary things happened again. The horror was not over, but had only just begun a new chapter, an even more terrifying one. The bogeyman appeared again to take children. This time, she was no longer a living person, but a terrifying ghost. Several children went missing in a row. The police had to send a patrol team to search for them, but there were no results. It was a dead end. Even though the police had increased their patrols, the ghost of the bogeyman still occasionally appeared to take children. This incident made the villagers once again fall into a state of confusion and fear. I recalled all the things I had heard from the adults about the bogeyman. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. I couldn't stay calm. I always had the feeling that someone was following me. That feeling sent shivers down my spine, and I just wanted to get home quickly. I quickly ran straight to my friend's house, not daring to look back. I just ran as fast as I could, hoping to escape the pursuit. When I got inside, I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. I was safe and no longer had to worry about being taken by the bogeyman, which was a stroke of luck. My two classmates, Wang Shen and Liu Lang, saw me running frantically, my face pale, and were curious about what had happened. They didn't understand why I looked so panicked and tired. They were very worried. I didn't dare to say that I was afraid of being taken by the bogeyman. I had to awkwardly lie that a dog had chased me. The three of us started playing poker. The fun game somewhat eased my tension and fear. We played from 6:30 until almost 8 o'clock. Time flew by, and it was soon time to go home. Wang Shen was afraid of getting home late and being scolded. He didn't want to be punished by his parents for playing and losing track of time, so he was very worried. He said that it was 8 o'clock already and he had to go home. If not, he would definitely be spanked. When Wang Shen was about to leave, the two of us also lost interest in playing. Furthermore, if I didn't go home, I would also be scolded, so we decided to go home together. Our houses were not in the same direction, so after leaving Lu Lang's house, we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. I was left alone to walk home. The road was deserted and dark, which made me feel a little uneasy and scared. I had forgotten about the bogeyman while playing, but walking alone in the dark, I remembered. I always felt that there were footsteps following me. I kept turning my head to look back, my attention all focused behind me. I was afraid that the bogeyman would suddenly appear and take me, which was very frightening. As I was walking, a stray dog suddenly ran out of a nearby alley. It bared its teeth, snarled, and barked at me, a sudden attack. I was so scared that I backed away to a wall. The stray dog was now right in front of me, giving me no escape route. The situation was very critical. It barked at me fiercely. I could feel the danger getting closer, not knowing what to do to get away. It seemed it could pounce and bite me at any moment. I was so scared that I couldn't move. I could only stand still and endure it in vain. I was so scared that I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, the stray dog stopped barking, a terrifying silence. It was very strange. It stared at an alley next to me, as if it was very afraid. Its eyes showed extreme horror, which it could not hide. It bowed its head, whimpered a few times, and then turned and ran away. Its action made me curious about what had scared it so much. Seeing that the dog had run away, I breathed a sigh of relief. I had escaped a disaster, and it was a stroke of luck that it had not attacked me. At this moment, I remembered to check what had scared the stray dog away. I was curious and wanted to know the truth behind its strange action. I turned my head towards the alley, and the hair on my neck stood up. The sight before me was something I could not believe. It was very scary. An old woman with disheveled hair was standing at the entrance of the alley. Her face was in the shadows, and I couldn't see it clearly, which was very ghostly. That was the bogeyman that the adults often talked about. She had appeared right in front of me. It was no longer a story. I thought I was surely going to die. The bogeyman would definitely take me, and I couldn't escape my fate. I was filled with despair. However, the bogeyman just stood there, motionless. She had no intention of attacking me and just stood there silently like a statue. A few seconds later, she vanished without a trace. She had left, leaving me with extreme confusion and fear. I couldn't understand it. I knew that I had definitely encountered the ghost of the bogeyman. It was not a hallucination, but a very scary reality. I was so scared that I ran home as fast as I could. I didn't dare to stay there for another second and just wanted to get away from that scary place. When I got home, I quickly locked the door. I was still in a state of shock after experiencing a terrifying encounter with a ghost. My breathing hadn't even returned to normal when my mother started scolding me for being late. She had no idea that I had just gone through a horrifying experience. I felt a little wronged. I thought that I had just narrowly escaped death and was almost unable to return, yet I was still being scolded. In the end, my grandmother intervened for me. She stroked my head and told me not to mind what my mother said and to go wash my face and go to bed. She urged me to quickly wash my face and go to bed. She didn't want me to think too much about what had happened and just wanted me to rest. I told her about my encounter with the bogeyman. I said that she had saved me from the stray dog, which was very strange. She was curious and asked if I had really seen the bogeyman. I, in turn, asked her why the adult said that she specialized in taking children. I also insisted that she had saved me and was not a bad person. I didn't understand why the adult said that she was a ghost who harmed people. My grandmother tucked me in and said that it was just something the adults made up to scare children. The real bogeyman was not a bad person, but a pitiful one. My grandmother said that the bogeyman had an unfortunate life. Her son and daughter-in-law had both died in a car accident, which was very tragic. Only a grandson was left to live with her. However, as misfortune never comes singly, one day, while she was working in the yard, her grandson ran out and never returned. The bogeyman went mad, going everywhere to look for her grandson. However, no matter how she searched, she could never find him, which made her very desperate. Later, her mental health deteriorated. Whenever she saw a little boy, she would think it was her grandson and rush to grab him, which was very scary. One time, she picked up a child on the street and ran home with him. The child's mother quickly chased after her, yelling and demanding that she give her child back. The child's parents called the police. When the police found the bogeyman, the child was already dead. Because of this, she was sentenced. A heartbreaking tragedy. As time went on, the story of the bogeyman was embellished and became more and more evil. She told me not to go out at night anymore. I don't know if the person I met was the real bogeyman. I only know that she saved me, and maybe she is still looking for her grandson.
This is a true story that took place in the autumn of 2015 at a mine in the north. In the silent atmosphere, two men were sitting on the porch of an old house. One of them began to recount a bizarre story he had just heard. With a grave expression, the man said it was a first-hand experience of a friend who worked as a miner at a nearby coal mine. That night, after finishing his shift, he was walking home with a colleague. They encountered a terrifying event. As they walked, they casually complained about the depleting coal reserves deep underground. The alcohol from a previous gathering made their steps a bit unsteady on the deserted road. Suddenly, amidst the silence of the small path by the forest, a faint cry for help rang out. The sound was not too loud, but enough to make both of them halt and look around anxiously, as this area was very far from any residential settlement. The two kind-hearted workers did not hesitate and began searching the surroundings to find where the voice was coming from. However, the cry for help was flickering at times, sounding as if it were right next to them, at other times as if echoing from a very distant place, making it impossible for them to find any trace. Just as they were about to give up, they suddenly discovered a long rift hidden behind a cluster of bushes. This time, the cry for help rang out clearly, confirming for certain that someone was in distress right beneath this crack in the ground. The sound echoing from beneath the earth sounded hollow and full of malevolence, creating an indescribable sense of horror. Curiously, even at its widest point, the rift was only about 10 centimeters across, making it impossible for them to understand how a grown man could have fallen into it. Despite their hearts being full of questions and confusion, they both approached the rift to see what was actually happening. They tried to press their faces close to the narrow crack, peering into the deep darkness below to assess the situation. The sight that appeared left them paralyzed with fear. Deep under the rift, there truly was a man being squeezed tightly by two walls of earth. The man was held so firmly that he could not move, only able to utter weak pleas for help with his dying breath. Realizing they could not use human strength alone to break the earth walls, the two workers were extremely anxious. One of them quickly leaned down close to the opening to reassure the victim, promising they would find a way to get him out at all costs. After a quick discussion, one person decided to stay and keep watch, while the other rushed down the mountain to find more people and support tools. The figure of the collie gradually disappeared into the night, leaving a sense of overwhelming anxiety behind. While waiting for rescue, the worker who stayed had a chance to observe more closely and realized the victim was completely exhausted, his face bloodless. Before long, a group of miners who had heard the news arrived at the scene with shovels and picks to begin the rescue. Everyone took turns digging for half a day, but progress was very slow because the victim was trapped at a depth of more than 10 meters. This area was the subsidence zone of an old coal mine, forming cracks hundreds of meters deep and dangerously vertical. After more than 7 hours of effort, most of the man's body was finally exposed. However, the situation became even more bizarre when they noticed there was no large open space beneath the victim to explain how he had gotten stuck there. Ignoring the absurdities, everyone used all their strength to pull the victim out of the grip of the earth and rocks. The man was now completely paralyzed, his breathing shallow, and he quickly fell into a deep coma right after being brought to the surface. The victim was immediately rushed to the town hospital for emergency treatment. Fortunately, aside from severe physical weakness due to being trapped for too long, he did not suffer any overly serious injuries and gradually regained consciousness. When he was alert, the two workers who saved him could not contain their curiosity and asked about the cause of this rare accident. Upon hearing it mentioned, the man on the hospital bed suddenly became tense, his eyes filled with sheer terror. Still in shock, the man tremblingly recounted that he had encountered demons. He was also a miner at another mine in town, and this strange incident had begun at midnight 2 days prior. That day, due to a machine failure, his team was let off early. He and a few friends stopped at a small tavern to drink. When leaving, he was still holding an unfinished bottle of wine, walking in a drunken state. With the mindset of a man doing dangerous work in the mines, he often lived by the motto, "Drink for today." His mind was not at all clear. While stumbling down the road, he suddenly saw very strange signs behind a roadside bush. A strange, brilliant golden light pulsed continuously and enchantingly from behind the bushes. Curiosity mixed with the alcohol urged him to run over and check, and the sight before him filled his heart with joy. Before his eyes was a large trench that had just cracked open, and the bottom of the trench shone brightly with countless gold, silver, and treasures. Thinking of the legends of treasures from old dynasties buried in this region, he thought his life-changing luck had finally arrived. In extreme excitement, he leaped down to the bottom of the trench, clutching the pile of gold and silver to his chest. But at his most triumphant moment, his ears suddenly heard the terrifying crumbling sounds of earth and rocks sliding down from both sides of the trench walls. Looking up, he was horrified to realize the two walls of earth were slowly closing in on each other. Fear overwhelmed greed. He threw away all the treasures and scrambled to find a way up, his mouth never stopping its desperate cries for help. Strangely, the trench that seemed shallow when he jumped down had now become extraordinarily deep, with vertical walls that gave him nowhere to grip. More terrifyingly, from beneath the layer of black earth, countless ghastly hands appeared, reaching up to grab him tightly. Held by numerous black hands and the increasingly narrowing earth walls, the man fell into utter despair. He felt his body sinking deeper into the dark earth. His screams were swallowed by the silent night. In that moment, he was certain he would lose his life in this rift without anyone knowing, and then he gradually lost consciousness. After hearing that thrilling story, everyone present could not help but be shocked and stunned. At first, they suspected the man was mentally ill or hallucinating due to being too drunk, but the fact that he was stuck in the narrow crack was undeniable. When leaving the hospital, the two rescuers began to have unsettling thoughts about that treasure. Greed clouded their reason. The two workers discussed it and used all their savings to hire an excavator to carry out a plan. They secretly returned to the place where they had saved the man to begin their dream treasure hunt. With the help of the machinery, the digging speed was many times faster than human effort, and soon a large hole was dug. While the work was in progress, the excavator driver suddenly stopped because he hit something. When he saw what had been dug up, he screamed in horror. What the bucket brought to the surface was not treasure, but a cold corpse. The two workers were stunned. Their hope for wealth vanished instantly, replaced by an atmosphere of gloom and ill omen. As soon as the first corpse was laid down, the ground beside it suddenly subsided, revealing two more bodies lying deep in the hole. These corpses were very strange. Judging by their clothing, they seemed to be from many years ago, but their bodies had not rotted. Instead, they had become blackened, dried mummies. Their postures were all the same. Mouths wide open as if crying for help, and hands reaching upward in a final effort to escape. The discovery of a series of corpses immediately shocked the whole region, and the police quickly got involved. After forensic examination, the conclusion was that these victims had died a long time ago, likely miners who had met with accidents but were secretly and poorly buried by unscrupulous mine owners to cover up the tracks. No treasure was found, only painful truths were unearthed. The narrator sat in deep thought about the magical light the man had seen. Then he suddenly remembered the folk legends he used to hear his grandfather tell when he was a child. It was said that this region was the origin of the Jurchen people, and the gold and silver looted from the Central Plains were all hidden here. Over time, those treasures absorbed the spiritual energy of the earth and sky and became spirits. They often used illusory gold and silver to lure greedy people into traps, while the real treasures themselves had long ago burrowed into the earth, disappearing along with the souls of the unfortunate victims. This horror story happened in 2004, an event I will never forget. That year, a few people from my hometown and I were introduced to a construction site by an uncle to work. We found work in the capital with a high salary, and we also had free food and lodging. For people who had just come from the countryside like us, it was too good to be true. This was a very large project, building a world-class stadium. This place would welcome athletes from all over the world to compete. My uncle said that being able to participate in this project was a great honor, a stroke of good luck. My uncle took us to a newly built temporary housing area. He said that we would be living here and the company would take care of all our food, so there was no need to worry. It was our first time working outside, so everything looked new to us. The room was simple, but it was enough for us to have a place to rest our heads. According to my uncle, we chose our beds. My friend and I decided which beds we would sleep in, and we quickly settled in. In this way, we settled into our living quarters. Everything went smoothly, signaling a good start for the upcoming months of work. Since we had never done this kind of work before, we were trained for a few days. After that, we officially began our work on the construction site. I was assigned to set up scaffolding with an older man. He had been working here for a few months before me and was very experienced. While I was working high up, I saw a shrine in the distance. I curiously asked the old master what that place was, as it looked very ancient. The old man glanced at it and said that it was the Empress's shrine. He didn't seem surprised at all, as if he was already very familiar with its presence. After that, he said that it would only be a few more days. When the construction reached that point, the shrine would be demolished to make way for the project. It would no longer exist. That evening, after work, I told a few other workers about this while we were eating. I wanted to know more about the mysterious shrine. I asked them if anyone had seen the shrine on the construction site. I was curious to know if anyone knew anything about its history. A few of them had seen the shrine. One person curiously asked what was so special about a shrine. I had an idea, and I said that after dinner we had nothing to do. How about we all go to the shrine to take a look? I suggested. Everyone agreed and said they would go with me. They were also curious about the shrine and wanted to go there to see what was so special about it. After dinner, we all went to the shrine. The night covered everything, creating a gloomy and spooky atmosphere. On the way, one person even teased his friend. He joked that he should go to the shrine and pray for the Empress to grant him a girlfriend. The two of them argued about this all the way there. They kept teasing each other until they got to the shrine's entrance. The atmosphere was very lively. I looked up at the plaque hanging on the shrine's door. However, the letters on it were a bit faded and I couldn't read them clearly anymore. It said Empress's Shrine, but the second character was peeled off and I couldn't make it out. A strange feeling crept into my heart. We didn't pay much attention to it and pushed open the dusty door to enter without any hesitation or fear. Because it had been abandoned, the inside was very messy and dilapidated. This desolate scene made us feel a little disappointed.
It was not what we had expected. The three of us walked around and got to the main hall. This was the main worship area of the shrine, and it was the most sacred place. It was very solemn. Although I didn't recognize it, I could guess. That was probably the statue of the Empress who was worshipped here. She looked very majestic. Because my mother in my hometown also often worshipped bodhisattvas, I had a habit of bowing. I told my two friends to bow with me to pray for peace. Unexpectedly, one of my friends not only didn't bow, but also said some disrespectful things. He said that if the Empress couldn't even protect her own shrine, how could she bless others? The other friend also didn't bow. Only I sincerely bowed, praying for peace, hoping that I wouldn't encounter any bad luck in the coming days. The two of them waited for me at the door. They didn't want to stay in this gloomy shrine for another second and just wanted to leave quickly. The shrine was not big, and there was nothing fun to do. We walked around, felt that there was nothing interesting, so we turned around and left, ending our trip. On the second day here, a horrifying thing happened, which completely changed our lives, a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. That morning, before going to work, my friend asked me where I was assigned to work. Because our jobs were different, he was very curious. My job was a bit easier than theirs. I was only in charge of setting up scaffolding. I asked him what he would be doing today. I was very concerned. He and the others were doing odd jobs. Suddenly, a button on his shirt fell off, like a bad omen. I said that I had a needle and thread and could help him sew it on. However, he said that he would do it in the evening after work, and it was too late now. Before he left the door, he said that today they would be demolishing the shrine. His words made me feel a little uneasy. No one expected that when he left today, he would never be able to return. He passed away forever, leaving behind endless sorrow. As for what happened at that time, I only heard about it from other workers later. It was a horrifying story that I could never forget. He and a group of people went to the shrine's entrance. The person in charge told them to remove the shrine's door first to make it easier to go in and out. My friend and a few other workers went forward to remove the shrine's door. The person in charge also told them to be careful and not to be careless. The shrine's door was very sturdy and also very heavy. It took a lot of effort for them to remove it, a very difficult and hard job. After some time, they were able to remove one of the doors with a lot of effort. Everyone was exhausted and covered in sweat. The door was taken off and fell to the ground with a thud. Dust flew up everywhere, making it impossible for the people standing nearby to see clearly. The people standing in front all felt a cold gust of wind blow on their faces. That feeling sent shivers down their spines. They felt a sense of unease. After that, a wind began to rise. The wind grew stronger and stronger, carrying with it debris from the ground, creating a chaotic scene. And the wind blew in a very strange way, swirling on the ground. It was not like a normal wind, but had a ghostly, scary feel to it. It became more and more violent, carrying all sorts of debris from the ground. The fragments flew everywhere, hitting people painfully. We thought the wind would die down soon. However, it grew even stronger, blowing people back and forth, making it impossible for them to stand still. In the midst of the chaos, someone pointed to the construction site's fence. He screamed, telling everyone to look in that direction, that something was wrong. The workers who were there all turned to look in the direction he was pointing. When they saw it, they all went pale. They couldn't believe their eyes. They saw that next to the construction site's fence, a whirlwind suddenly appeared. The whirlwind grew bigger and bigger, carrying a destructive force. The wind was so strong that it could easily blow away the fence. The fragments were sent flying into the air, creating a very frightening scene. The whirlwind carried all kinds of debris and went straight to the Empress's shrine. Everyone screamed in fear, telling each other to run away quickly. The people who were there had never seen this sight before. They were scared and turned around to run, not daring to stay there for another second. The people who ran slower were directly lifted into the air. They were thrown away by the whirlwind, unable to resist the power of nature. In the blink of an eye, a whirlwind, several dozen meters high, had arrived in front of the shrine. It blew away many of the temporary houses and scaffolding on its way. At that time, I was on the scaffolding far away, so I saw everything very clearly. In front of the shrine was a very desolate and chaotic scene, which was very scary. The whirlwind lasted for more than 10 minutes before it dissipated. The other workers and I quickly ran there to help people, our hearts filled with worry. When we arrived, a few people were already there. They were rescuing people who were buried under the rubble. The scene was very chaotic and tragic. That was also the first time I had seen so many dead people. That horrifying sight left a deep psychological trauma in me. The scene at that time was truly very tragic. Everywhere were dismembered bodies, covered in blood, a sight I could never forget. I found my friend's body in the rubble. His arm was sticking out, covered in blood, a very heartbreaking and haunting image even now. My friend, who was with me from morning until night, had died just like that. The pain of losing my friend made me unable to hold back my tears, and my heart was filled with sorrow. To this day, I still remember his appearance when he died, and also the missing button on his chest. The accident caused many people to die. What was strange was that the whirlwind was so strong, but the shrine was not even damaged. The workers were dismissed after the incident for no apparent reason. Later, many people from my hometown came to visit, saying that the shrine was still there. This is a true story of mine. That year, after graduating from college, I used my meager savings to rent a room near my company for convenience. I asked my friend Wang Jie to help me move. As soon as he stepped into the hallway, he complained that the place I rented was too dilapidated and old. It was uninhabitable. I said that even though it was old, the price was cheap. For someone who had just started working like me, a room at this price every month was more than enough. I couldn't ask for more. However, as soon as he walked through the door, Wang Jie was stunned. He was astonished and asked who had lived in this strange room before, saying it looked very scary. I didn't know who the previous tenant was. The room was covered in pictures of gods and bodhisattvas. It seemed that when they moved out, they had not taken these things with them. Wang Jie had the same expression as me. He also wondered what the previous tenant had done that they had to worship so many gods and Buddhas. Furthermore, the worship items didn't look cheap. I didn't understand why the person hadn't taken them with them when they moved out. It was very strange. Having no religious beliefs, I felt uncomfortable. I gathered everything into a cardboard box and invited Wang Jie to dinner, and then we went home to sleep early. However, in the middle of the night, I kept feeling there was something in the room. I wanted to wake up and check, but I couldn't wake up. I was very tired. That feeling grew stronger and stronger. Finally, I felt someone sitting on me, but I was completely unable to move. My mind was very clear, but I couldn't open my eyes or move. I could only lie still, feeling the scary presence weighing down on me. That feeling lasted until the next morning. When the sunlight streamed in, the scary feeling slowly disappeared, leaving me exhausted. Because I hadn't moved all night, when I woke up, my whole body was aching and my head was pounding. I tried to sit up, feeling very uncomfortable and tired. My face and body also started to itch. When I walked into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, I couldn't believe my eyes. My face and body were covered in disgusting, pus-filled pimples. Furthermore, they caused an itch that went deep into my bones. It was very uncomfortable. I didn't know why so many pimples had appeared overnight. When I tried to squeeze them, a thick liquid flowed out, which had a foul smell. Although it smelled bad, it didn't hurt when I squeezed it. Not wanting to go to work with this face, I tried to squeeze them all out. It was very disgusting. However, after squeezing them, the pimples quickly swelled up again. I had no other choice but to go to work with my face covered in pus-filled pimples. That day, from the moment I left the house until I got to the company, everyone looked at me like I was a monster. Their discriminatory looks made me very uncomfortable. Some people even whispered that they had to stay away from me. They seemed afraid that the pimples on my face would spread to them, a scary avoidance. When I got to the company, Wang Jie was also astonished and asked me what I had done to end up like this. I didn't hide anything and told him everything that had happened the night before. After hearing this, Wang Jie thought for a moment, then seriously said that I had been ghost-pressed, a phenomenon rumored in folklore. Wang Jie's words startled me, but when I thought back to what had happened, it was indeed very similar to the ghost-pressing phenomenon that people often talked about. Wang Jie advised me to find someone to help, but first, I should go to the hospital. If I didn't get timely treatment, my face might be completely ruined. During my lunch break, I went to the hospital. The doctor was also very surprised, but after doing all the tests, he couldn't find the cause. That night, I applied the medicine as the doctor instructed. The itching still tormented me to the bone, but I didn't dare to scratch. Unable to find another place to live, I had no choice but to stay. That night, I didn't dare to sleep. I tried to stay awake, staring at the ceiling, hoping that nothing else would happen. However, my eyelids didn't listen and kept drooping. In the end, I unknowingly fell asleep, unable to resist the sleepiness. That night, I didn't experience the ghost-pressing phenomenon. However, I heard the voices of a mother and daughter talking in my room very clearly. The sound was very real, as if they were right in front of me. However, I couldn't open my eyes. I could only manage to slightly open them. I vaguely saw a little girl, whose face was also covered in pimples like mine. The girl couldn't bear the itching and wanted to scratch, but her mother stopped her, afraid of infection. The scene was both scary and disgusting. Under the strong stimulation, my mind suddenly became clear and I sat up with a start, completely panicked. However, I realized it was just a dream. Turning my head to look out the window, it was already dawn. A horrifying night had passed. I suddenly felt that my face was not only itchy but also painful. When I touched it, I discovered that besides pus, there was also blood, as if I had scratched it open in my dream. Looking at my ulcerated face, I was terrified. I quickly put on a hooded jacket, intending to go to the hospital one more time to check my condition. I walked out with my head bowed, and an old woman walked in the opposite direction. I was afraid she would see my face, so I bowed my head even lower, but she still saw and started a conversation. Since I didn't know her, I ignored her and continued walking. However, she called me from behind, as if she had something very important to say. I turned my head to look but didn't stop. I thought she was from the committee and wanted to check my documents, so I wasn't in the mood to pay attention. However, she still called me back to talk. During our conversation, she seemed to know very well about what had happened to me. She also told me about a mother and daughter who used to live here. She said that a mother and daughter used to live there. The daughter had contracted a strange illness. Her face was covered in pus-filled pimples, and in the end, her whole face became ulcerated. The mother was always by her side, taking care of her. In the end, both mother and daughter died from infection. The tenants after them all experienced similar things. The old woman was an old resident of the building and knew this story very well. She was afraid I wouldn't believe her and continuously urged me to move out quickly or I would lose my life. I borrowed money from everywhere and finally gathered enough. I found a slightly better house and quickly moved out of that haunted room. To be honest, it was very strange.
What happened to my face?
After I moved to the new place, the pimples on my face dried up and peeled off in just a few days. A sudden change. Although there were still a few scars on my face, I was very content. Recalling what I had been through, it all seemed like a nightmare. The scary story I am about to share happened to me and two of my close friends, an unforgettable experience in my life. Around July or August of that year, we organized a self-guided trip. The itinerary was planned by my friend Chen to a secluded village. Chen was driving, with Min and me as passengers. After leaving the highway, we began to drive on winding, bumpy, and difficult village roads. The car's constant shaking made me very uncomfortable. I complained to my friends that if we didn't arrive soon, I would probably throw up in the car. Chen and Min were fine, but I was car sick. Chen comforted me, saying that remote places required a bit of a long drive and that we were almost there. The car's shaking made me just want to vomit. I wondered how Chen had found this place, a place so remote. After Chen said, "We're almost there," several times, it was finally almost dark. Our car finally entered a small village. My friends teased me, asking if I was still alive, since we had arrived. Honestly, if we had driven for 10 more minutes, I probably would have thrown up. I tiredly turned my head to look out the window. Unfamiliar scenery appeared before my eyes, and I wondered if we had truly arrived. The car stopped in front of a house. Chen said that this was the farmhouse he had booked and urged us to get out of the car quickly. I got out of the car and looked around. The village looked quite poor and backward, not what I had imagined, and I felt a little disappointed. I felt a little regretful for listening to them and coming here. I wondered what there was to do or experience in a place like this. Chen knocked on the door. A woman in her 40s opened it. She was probably the hostess. He introduced himself and said that he had contacted her by phone. Because we had a prior appointment, the hostess warmly invited us in. She was very friendly and hospitable, which made us feel more comfortable. The hostess led us to our room. It was a clean room with 3 single beds inside, enough for all 3 of us to rest. Since it was getting dark, the hostess said she would prepare dinner for us. We thanked her and began to unpack our belongings, preparing for a meal after a long journey. I walked into the room and collapsed onto the bed, not wanting to move. The long journey and my car sickness had left me feeling very tired and exhausted. Chen urged us to quickly wash our faces and clean up. He said that after dinner there would still be time to go for a walk. Because of my car sickness, I didn't want to move. I grumbled that there was nothing to see in a secluded place like this, thinking that I had been tricked into coming here. Min was more optimistic. He gave me 2 options: either go back to the city myself or shut up and listen to everyone's arrangements. The hostess knew what time we would arrive, so she had already prepared dinner. The 3 of us sat down at the table, ready for a feast. I had thought it would be a simple meal, but to my surprise, the hostess had prepared a very lavish meal which made my mouth water. I happily said that out of the entire trip, this meal was the most worthwhile. The delicious smell of the food made me forget all my fatigue from the journey. The hostess had prepared 6 dishes for the 3 of us. She was even afraid we wouldn't have enough to eat and said she would make more, which was very generous. I ate and continuously praised the hostess's cooking skills. With my mouth full of food, I couldn't speak clearly, but I still tried to express my praise. The hostess also took this opportunity to ask us to help her promote her guest house. She said that this could help her family escape poverty, a sincere request. While talking, Chen asked the hostess if there were any fun places to go in the village. He wanted to find a place to go for a walk after dinner. The hostess suggested that we go to the small pond behind the village. She said that the guests who had come here before all loved that place, a very appealing suggestion. After eating our fill, the 3 of us followed the path the hostess had pointed out, heading toward the small pond, filled with curiosity and excitement. Along the way, Chen and Min teased me again. They said that now that I had a full stomach, I no longer wanted to go back to the city, a light-hearted jab. Leaving the village, we walked a short distance and arrived at a small pond. The scenery under the moonlight was very peaceful and quiet. To be honest, my first impression of this place was nothing special. I said that this place was quite peaceful, but there was nothing particularly outstanding or unusual about it. It was just a place like a small reservoir. The trees around it were a little thicker, and it still had a wild feel, not much different from other places. I felt a little disappointed, thinking that this place was nothing special. I kicked at the grass by the roadside to show my displeasure. Unexpectedly, that kick disturbed the insects in the grass. They flew up, emitting flickering green lights, which was a beautiful sight. After a moment of surprise, we realized these were the fireflies from Legends, a sight we had never seen before. Although we had heard of them, we had never seen them with our own eyes. All 3 of us were astonished, unable to believe what we were seeing. The 3 grown men began to chase the fireflies. We wanted to catch one or two to get a closer look, like curious children. However, after a long struggle, we couldn't catch any. All of them flew up into the sky, blending into the starry night. A real shame. The three of us stood there, marveling at the beautiful sight. It was a scene that modern people rarely had the opportunity to witness. The next day, we went up the mountain near the village to have fun. We took souvenir photos, capturing the memorable moments of this trip. Although the journey was a little difficult, the pristine scenery here was indeed much more beautiful than in artificially developed tourist areas. The day's journey ended, and when we returned to the guest house, the hostess had prepared other dishes for us. We ate with great joy and satisfaction. While eating, the three of us began to discuss where we would go that night. We wanted to fully enjoy our time off here. Chen said that when he was on the mountain, he had seen an old stage on the outskirts of the village. He suggested that after dinner we could go there. As we were discussing, the hostess brought in the food. She reminded us that it would be best to stay indoors tonight and not go anywhere. A warning. We were curious and asked why we couldn't go out tonight. We could go out last night, so why not tonight? Was there some kind of taboo? The hostess didn't explain much. She just said to listen to her, that she wouldn't harm us, and then she turned and left, leaving us confused. After eating, we returned to our room. Since it was still early and we couldn't sleep, I felt very bored and didn't know what to do. I suggested we go for a walk. However, Min and Chen thought that the hostess's words were not without reason, so it would be better to be careful. I felt it was very strange. Why wouldn't they let us go out? Was there something in the village that outsiders couldn't know about? Chen told me not to talk nonsense. He said that in secluded mountain areas there are often taboos, and it's best to follow them. As the three of us were arguing, the sound of gongs and drums suddenly echoed from outside. The sound was very clear, which piqued our curiosity. The sound of gongs and drums. All three of us heard it very clearly, a very familiar sound. Out of curiosity, we went to the window. The three of us opened the window, wanting to see what was happening outside, unable to control ourselves. When we opened the window, the sound of the gongs and drums was even clearer. The sound was coming from the west side of the village. It seemed there was some kind of performance. All three of us guessed that it was a play. The sound was very clear. There was no mistaking it, which was a very unexpected and interesting thing. I immediately suggested that we go and join the fun. My suggestion hit the nail on the head. No one could refuse it. In the end, Chen and Min couldn't say no. The three of us climbed over the back wall to go outside, despite the warning. The three of us ran in the direction of the gongs and drums. We went towards the western edge of the village, our hearts filled with excitement and curiosity. Leaving the village, we saw an old stage in the distance, hidden behind the bushes. The sound was indeed coming from there. I couldn't help but complain about the hostess. It was just a play. Why wouldn't she let us go? It was a very confusing prohibition. As we got closer, we felt that something was a bit strange. The stage was pitch black. There were no lights, and we couldn't see the performers, but there were people watching. Furthermore, people were coming from other places. However, their walk was a bit strange. It looked very stiff and unnatural. We didn't think too much of it. We pushed aside the chest-high grass and walked forward. We were curious why there were so many weeds. When we got closer, we saw that there were more than 10 people standing below the stage. Their clothes were all very colorful. They looked like a festive crowd. I approached a person and asked what day it was that they were having a play. I wanted to know more about this strange performance. Without any suspicion, when those people slowly turned their heads, we were so scared we almost wet our pants. The sight before us terrified us to the extreme. They were not living people, but paper figures. All of them turned their heads and stared at us, a horrifying sight. The three of us were scared out of our wits. We quickly turned and ran away, not daring to stay there for another second. We ran all the way back to the guest house and frantically knocked on the door. Fortunately, the paper figures did not chase us. Otherwise, we don't know what would have happened. The hostess came to open the door, surprised and asking when we had gone out. She had no idea that we had secretly climbed over the wall. We were out of breath and told her that we had encountered ghosts. All three of us were very scared and could not calm down after what we had witnessed. The hostess froze for a moment and then immediately understood. She sternly asked if we had secretly gone to the old stage, saying there was no need to deny it. The hostess invited us in and poured us water to drink. After that, she began to tell us the story of that old stage. She said that the play tonight was not for people. It was to celebrate the birthday of Mrs. San, a very special person. We were very confused by the hostess's words. Who was Mrs. San? And how could those paper figures move? The hostess explained that Mrs. San was a yellow immortal that the villagers worshipped. Legend has it that she was very powerful and no one dared to offend her. There was an old stage outside the village that had been abandoned for a long time. No one knew since when, but every time it was Mrs. San's birthday, countless golden weasels from all over would carry paper figures to the stage. They would place the paper figures below the stage to watch the play. The villagers dared not offend Mrs. San. Therefore, on that day, they all went to bed early, and no one dared to go out to join the fun. The next day, the villagers would send someone to clean up the abandoned paper figures. They would take them and burn them, restoring peace to the area. We had heard of stories about weasel spirits. However, we never expected the situation to be so scary and bizarre, exceeding our imagination. After experiencing a horrifying night, we decided to end our trip a day early. We said goodbye to the hostess and left the village. When the car passed by the old stage, all three of us wanted to take one more look. We got out of the car, wanting to uncover the truth behind the story. Although we were mentally prepared, when we got close to the stage, we still felt an indescribable strangeness, a chilling feeling. The stage was old and dilapidated, with discarded paper figures all over it. The scene was very desolate and ghostly, which made people shiver. The golden weasels, both big and small, were crawling in and out of the torn paper figures. That sight made us feel very uncomfortable and scary. The first half of the trip was wonderful. However, the second half truly left a psychological trauma in me that I will never forget. This strange story is about something I experienced firsthand. Ever since I was very young, I've had a scar on my forehead. Every time I asked where the scar came from, my mother would just say I fell on my own as a child. Kids are clumsy, falling is normal, so having a scar was nothing strange. I was raised by my mother alone. Ever since I was old enough to understand, every time I asked about my father, she would only say he died in an accident when I was very little. But there wasn't a single photograph of my father in the house, nor any of his belongings. All of this indicated that things were not as simple as my mother claimed. It wasn't until much later, when I stumbled upon my mother's old photo album, that I learned my father had been her university professor. Unfortunately, that heartless bastard went abroad to study by himself after my mother became pregnant with me and was never heard from again. After learning this, I lost all interest in my father and never asked about him again. However, the scar on my forehead was a different story. It wasn't as simple as my mother had said. This story must begin with my second uncle. He came to our house for dinner one day and had a bit too much to drink. In his drunken stupor, he let slip the story of my scar. I heard that his version didn't sound like my mother's, and I felt even more strongly that something was wrong. I stood up, said I had been suspicious about this for a long time, and urged him to tell me the real story. My uncle put down his wine glass and glanced nervously toward the kitchen where my mother was washing dishes, his expression furtive and hesitant. Once he was sure she wouldn't be back for a moment, he narrowed his eyes and began to slowly tell the whole story. It began right after my mother had given birth to me. At that time, my mother, heavily pregnant, returned to her hometown, which drove my grandfather mad with rage. My grandfather was a teacher, respected by everyone in the village, but now his daughter was unwed and pregnant, and the father's whereabouts were unknown. Anyone would find this a terrible loss of face, let alone a teacher. My grandfather cursed my mother terribly and immediately kicked her out of the house, threatening her never to return. My grandmother understood my grandfather's prideful nature and knew he wouldn't be able to accept this anytime soon. Since my mother was about to give birth, the most urgent thing was to find her a place to stay. In the end, my grandmother had someone help rent a place nearby, settling the matter for the time being. In the following days, my grandmother and my second aunt took turns caring for my mother until I was born. Only then could they breathe a sigh of relief. After the postpartum confinement period, my mother was able to get out of bed to cook and clean. My second aunt stopped coming, but my grandmother still visited every evening, bringing food, nourishing items, and necessities, and also to hold her grandson for a while. Time flew by. When I was 5 months old, a terrifying incident occurred, which led to my accident. One afternoon, while I was fast asleep, my mother, as if possessed by something, wandered aimlessly out of the house alone. Just then, a neighbor was returning from the fields with his hoe and happened to run into my mother. He kindly asked her where she was going. He looked closely and saw my mother was only in her sleepwear, yet she was walking toward the edge of the village. He felt her behavior was very strange. The neighbor's words caught in his throat, because he saw that my mother's face was frightfully pale. Her lifeless eyes were fixed on the ground at her feet, and she was muttering something unintelligible. Seeing her like this, the neighbor immediately grabbed her arm. He asked why she was walking alone, and he also remembered to ask where I was. But the moment he touched her arm, she used an immense strength to fling him off. Caught off guard by the sudden push, the neighbor staggered and nearly fell. He looked up to see my mother, her face pale and emotionless, turn her back and walk away. Watching her retreating figure, he no longer had the courage to follow. His instinct screamed at him to stay away. It wasn't until her figure disappeared from the village gate that the neighbor let out a breath, his back soaked in sweat. he heard someone calling my mother's name from behind. He turned and saw it was my grandmother running toward him. It turned out my grandmother had just entered the house and found me wailing on the bed with no sign of my mother anywhere, so she had rushed out to find her. Seeing the neighbor, she panted as she asked if he had seen my mother. The neighbor's face was pale, his voice trembling as he said, "Your daughter. I fear she's been bewitched. She just headed out of the village. If you hurry, you can still catch her." When my grandmother heard this, she thought the neighbor was bad-mouthing her daughter and trembled with anger. But she had no time to argue and immediately ran in the direction my mother had gone. My grandmother ran frantically like a headless fly. But luckily there was only one path out of the village. Finally, she saw my mother's figure standing stock still on a cliff ledge at the edge of a small forest. It was a cliff as high as a 4 or 5-story building, with jagged rocks below. A jump from there would certainly be fatal. The moment my grandmother saw this, she almost screamed in terror but quickly clamped her hand over her mouth. She knew that in this situation, the slightest external shock could make my mother do the unthinkable. With that in mind, my grandmother secretly and slowly moved through the forest, quietly approaching my mother from behind without her knowing. When she was very close, she could vaguely see my mother's face. Her mouth was moving, as if she were talking to someone. She moved closer, trying to hear what my mother was saying, when suddenly, in the blink of an eye, my mother leaned forward and lunged straight off the cliff. Luckily, my grandmother was right there. With all her strength, she gave a hard shove, knocking my mother back in the opposite direction. They both tumbled down the right side of the slope. Fortunately, that side was relatively gentle, and they stopped rolling after a few turns. Still, both were lightly injured. My grandmother's palms were scraped raw, and my mother's arm was bleeding. But the light had returned to my mother's eyes. Her gaze was no longer vacant. She looked around, bewildered, and asked my grandmother why she was there. My grandmother said nothing, only gently told my mother not to talk and to come home with her first. After they returned home, they saw me asleep on the earthen bed, tear tracks still on my face. I had clearly cried myself to sleep. My mother moved to pick me up, but since I was asleep, my grandmother stopped her. Then she asked my mother what had happened today. My mother sat on the bed, her face pale, as if she had just remembered something. Her eyes grew wider and wider, her gaze filled with terror. She stammered, "Just now, there was a woman. She told me to follow her. I don't know why. I just followed her. Then, that woman led me to the cliff. She stood in front of me, grabbed my hand, and pulled me toward the edge. She told me, 'Jump, just jump and it will all be over. No more pain.' I don't know why, but at that moment, my mind was filled with all the suffering and shame I had endured. There was no room for any other thought. When the desire to die flashed in my mind, I listened to her and lunged toward the edge. After hearing my mother's story, my grandmother couldn't help but shudder and take a sharp breath. She was also terrified as to why such an evil entity would latch onto my mother in broad daylight. But she immediately reassured my mother, "Don't be afraid. I'm here. You just rest. I chant the sutras and pray to Buddha every day. No evil spirit would dare come near." Hearing my grandmother's words, my mother felt much calmer. She told her she was fine, just a little shaken. Just then, my second uncle appeared. Seeing the door unlocked, he cheerfully pushed it open and walked right in, asking, "Is my little nephew awake? Come here and let your uncle hold you." My second uncle had just started working back then. He was 3 years older than my mother, and they had been close since childhood. Ever since I, his nephew, was born, he would come over after work every day to play with me, loving me dearly. But seeing the pale expressions on both my mother's and grandmother's faces, he immediately sensed something was wrong and asked why everyone was so tense. My grandmother, afraid of upsetting my mother further, pulled my uncle outside, using the excuse that he shouldn't be loud while I was sleeping. Outside, my grandmother told him the entire story. He was horrified. He couldn't believe something so unimaginable could happen in broad daylight. My grandmother's face was ashen. She thought that any evil entity brazen enough to act in broad daylight would not let my mother go easily. She fell silent, deep in thought. She told my uncle to stay and keep watch for a while. She was going to old Liu's house and would be right back. Old Liu was a man in the village known as a half-immortal who knew some methods of exorcism. Though she was worried, my grandmother was always decisive. No sooner had she spoken than she was already far down the path. My uncle had no choice but to go back inside alone. As he reached the door, a cry rang out that made his heart stop. It was me. My uncle burst through the door and immediately froze, horrified by the scene before him. When my uncle told this part of the story, he became very agitated. That scene was clearly etched into his memory, so terrifying that he still had nightmares about it. He saw me lying on the floor, my forehead covered in blood, crying ceaselessly, clearly in great pain. And my mother, she was strangling herself with her own 2 hands. The blankets on the bed were in a chaotic mess from her thrashing legs. In that moment, my uncle didn't even have time to check on me. He lunged at my mother, trying with all his might to pry her hands from her own throat. My uncle was only in his early 20s then, in his prime. Yet even with all his strength, he couldn't loosen her grip even a little. Suddenly, he remembered the jade amulet he wore around his neck. My grandmother had asked the master for it, specifically for protection against evil. It was the only hope he had. He ripped the amulet off his neck and, without a second thought, shoved it straight into my mother's mouth. The effect was immediate. My mother convulsed a few times, and then her entire body suddenly went limp. Relieved, my uncle moved to support her, but just then, he felt an icy gust of wind brush past him. My uncle still shudders when he recalls it. The wind blew right through him, a bone-chilling cold. After it grazed his cheek, he clearly sensed that someone was standing right behind him. He turned his head and saw her, standing stiffly in the space between the end of the bed and the wardrobe, a woman with long hair. Her entire body emitted a dim, silver-gray light. She had no pupils, and her stomach was covered in a large, mottled bloodstain. Most terrifying of all, she grinned and said, "Don't fight it. Come with me. Come with me." Her voice was cold, spectral, and utterly grotesque. Between the cold wind and the shock of the horrifying sight, my uncle almost collapsed on the spot. But he remembered his sister and his newborn nephew were right in front of him, His protective instinct and sense of responsibility made him grit his teeth and roar at the top of his lungs, "Get the hell out!" After that roar, his mind cleared, and only one thought remained. He had to get my mother and me out of there. What happened next? My uncle himself still can't believe he instantly hoisted my mother onto his shoulder, scooped me up from the floor, and bolted out of the house. But he didn't stop there. He just kept running, carrying both of us for more than a mile. It wasn't until he saw other people around that he finally felt the exhaustion and collapsed on the ground. Soon after, my grandmother and old Liu arrived, along with several other villagers they had gathered. They carried my uncle, my mother, and me back to my grandfather's house. Once there, old Liu carefully performed an exorcism ritual, and my mother quickly recovered. My uncle was in a much worse state. He was bedridden for nearly half a month before he could walk again. As for me, I wasn't badly injured. I was just left with a scar on my forehead, and to this day, I still don't really know what happened that day. Later, my grandmother made an effort to investigate the house she had rented, but she couldn't find any stories about a woman dying there. However, there was a woman in the village who had died not long before she had fallen in her home while about to give birth and had bled to death, only in her 20s. But that woman's house was very far from where my mother was staying. It was baffling why her spirit would wander so far to torment my mother. Looking back, I feel it was likely related to my mother's state of mind at the time, abandoned by her fiancé, kicked out by her own family. She had hit rock bottom. When one's emotions are at such a low point, it's easy for evil spirits and demons to take the opportunity to invade, causing a person to do things completely beyond their control. This peculiar story tells of a strange charm, and it was the only time that Dr. Chan was unable to cure someone of their ailment. That day, Dr. Chan was drying herbs in his courtyard when a man walked in from the main gate. He looked distraught. He said he had come to see Dr. Chan for a medical examination. The man was dressed neatly. He introduced himself as Liu, who had come from a very distant place, having heard that Dr. Chan's medical skills were excellent. He said he was suffering from a strange illness, and although he had sought help from many places, no one had been able to cure him. Dr. Chan politely invited him inside and said that he had to examine him first to know if he could be helped. Dr. Chan thought the man's face didn't look like he was seriously ill and figured he was probably looking for a kidney tonic to boost his vigor. The man said a strange thing had grown on his chest and asked Dr. Chan to take a look. When asked about his illness, he said something strange had grown on him, then unbuttoned his jacket, revealing his chest for Dr. Chan to see. Dr. Chan was startled. He saw a large ulcer growing in the middle of the man's chest. What was strange was that the ulcer was shaped like a blooming peony flower, only the ulcer looked a bit gruesome. Dr. Chan said the ulcer was called a love charm. Although he had practiced medicine for many years, he had only heard of it and never seen it before. The story Dr. Chan told was not particularly frightening, but it left the listener with a heavy heart. Dr. Chan pondered for a moment and then confirmed that the young man had been cursed, not that he was ill. Seeing Dr. Chan's serious expression, Liu seemed to realize that the thing growing on his body was not simple, and he panicked, asking Dr. Chan about this love charm. Dr. Chan explained that this love charm was also called ghost flower and was a type of curse. Liu cried out in horror, I've been cursed, and begged Dr. Chan to save him. Dr. Chan said that to cure it, there were some things he needed to ask him first. Dr. Chan reassured him, saying, "Don't panic. This curse can't be resolved in an instant." Liu desperately pleaded, only wishing Dr. Chan could cure the ulcer immediately. But Dr. Chan was in no hurry to treat him. He calmly told him about the origin of the ghost flower love charm. This ulcer, called ghost flower, was naturally related to flowers. According to legend, this method of cursing originated from the Miao people. Young girls who were about to get married would choose the most beautiful blooming peony flower and water it with their blood every day for 49 days. These peony petals, nourished by the girl's blood, would grow and bloom larger. After that, they would crush the petals into a liquid extract and draw a peony flower on their lover's chest. The crimson liquid would slowly seep into the skin. If the man was unfaithful, an ulcer shaped like a peony flower would grow on his chest. This was the flower curse. If he could receive his lover's forgiveness, and she dripped her blood onto the ulcer, it would heal. If he could not receive his lover's forgiveness, the ulcer would continue to eat deeper, all the way to his heart, and no medicine could save him. Dr. Chan's story about the origin of the ghost flower made Liu so frightened that his body felt soft and weak. After that, he knelt on the ground, desperately begging Dr. Chan to help him. Dr. Chan then asked if he had wronged any girl which caused her to curse him. Under Dr. Chan's questioning, Liu hesitantly said that when he was in his hometown, he had a childhood sweetheart, and he revealed some secrets. Liu was born in the countryside. Due to his family's difficult financial situation, he did not finish his studies and could only stay home to farm. Although life was a bit tough, he had a childhood sweetheart that others envied. Even though the girl's family opposed their marriage, complaining that Liu's situation was too poor, the girl didn't care about these things. She loved him because he was a good person. The two would always secretly meet by the fields. Over time, their feelings deepened and they became inseparable. One time, in the heat of passion, the two ate the forbidden fruit. That time, after the two had secretly enjoyed each other in the haystack, Liu fell asleep. When he woke up, he discovered a drawing of a peony flower made of red liquid on his chest and wondered what it was. The girl told him that it was a concentricity charm that her grandmother had taught her to draw, which could protect them and keep them together forever. But things did not go as planned. Because the girl's family felt he had no future and that farming would not earn him money, Liu had no choice but to break up with the girl and go to the city to seek opportunities. The girl tearfully saw him off from the village, not leaving until he disappeared from sight. The city's glamour captivated Liu, and he gradually forgot about the girl waiting for him at home. He began to pursue money and pleasure. In the end, he married a divorced woman simply because she could satisfy all his desires. Liu knelt at Dr. Chan's feet, recounting a part of his past. Dr. Chan, having heard Liu's story, was furious. He was truly an unfaithful man. Dr. Chan truly could not break his love charm and told him that the only way to live was to go and beg that girl for forgiveness. He had to receive the forgiveness and blood of the one who cursed him. As soon as Liu heard that he had to get the forgiveness of the girl he had wronged in order to live, a look of discomfort appeared on his face. Seeing that there was no hope in asking Dr. Chan for help, Liu dejectedly drove away. Dr. Chan said that it was not because Liu was an unfaithful man that he didn't want to save him, but because the ghost flower truly had only that one way to be resolved. Later, as Dr. Chan was traveling to treat patients. He passed by the village Lu had mentioned. Dr. Chan asked the villagers about Lu's news. A villager who knew the story said that Liu had returned to find the girl, but the girl had contracted a serious illness and passed away. Liu did not live much longer either, dying in front of her grave. This horror story is about an unforgettable experience of my college friend Alex. A few days ago, he was traveling through my area for business, so he called me to catch up. In the afternoon, while driving to pick him up, I noticed that his complexion wasn't good. I worriedly asked him if he was feeling unwell. Alex sighed, looking a bit depressed. He told me not to bring it up. He had encountered a ghost a few days ago and still hadn't fully recovered. Hearing about a ghost encounter, I couldn't help but feel excited. I said that such a thing doesn't happen to everyone and asked him to tell me about it. Alex glanced at me and started telling his story. He said that this incident truly taught him a lesson he would never forget. The event happened a month ago. Alex had taken 5 days of annual leave to go back to his hometown to visit his grandfather, unaware that it would be a trip full of unexpected horror. Alex's hometown was deep in the mountains. The mountains were high and the roads were treacherous. Although there was a road into the village, it was winding and bumpy, very difficult to drive on. That day, Alex boarded the bus home. The bus drove slowly, and the scenery along the way brought back many old memories. However, before he could fully immerse himself in the memories, an abnormal sound pulled him back to reality. It seemed that something was wrong with the bus. The bus shook a few times and then slowly stopped. Everyone on the bus was very confused, not understanding why the bus had suddenly broken down in the middle of the road. The driver both cursed and tried to restart the bus a few times. However, the bus showed no reaction, seeming to have completely broken down. After that, the driver grabbed a toolbox and got off the bus. He tinkered at the back of the bus for a while, hoping to fix it and continue the journey. However, he couldn't solve the problem. He had to go back to the bus and tell the passengers that the bus couldn't run today and that they would have to wait for another one. Alex looked outside and recognized the road. From here to his house was only about 6 or 7 miles, which was not too far. He looked at his watch and realized that it was still early. He didn't want to wait for another bus, nor did he want to waste any more time here. Therefore, he said goodbye to the driver and got off the bus. He was too lazy to transfer, as walking home wouldn't take too much time. Walking alone and enjoying the scenery along the way, Alex's mood was rarely this relaxed. He felt very comfortable and at ease. However, that relaxation did not last long. As he walked, the sky suddenly turned dark, signaling that a heavy rain was about to pour down. The situation seemed quite unusual. Along with the rumbling thunder, it signaled a heavy rain was about to fall. The sky was pitch black, without a trace of light, a very frightening sight. Alex sighed, his initial good mood wiped clean. He had no choice but to quicken his pace, hoping to get home before the rain started. However, the thunderstorm didn't wait for him. He hadn't gone far when heavy rain poured down like a waterfall, making it impossible for him to continue. Alex used his backpack to cover his head. He looked around, hoping to find a place to take shelter, not wanting to be completely soaked in the middle of the road. Unexpectedly, in front of him by the roadside, he saw a black object. It was faintly visible and looked like the silhouette of an umbrella. When he got closer, it was indeed an umbrella. He couldn't believe that he was so lucky to find a rain shelter in the middle of the desolate mountains. Alex checked it and found that the umbrella wasn't broken. It was just a bit old, and the wooden handle had been worn smooth and shiny. Alex grabbed the umbrella, overjoyed. He happily opened it and continued his walk home, no longer having to worry about the rain. When he got home, his grandfather, seeing his grandson return, quickly welcomed him in. He couldn't contain his joy and was very happy to see him again. The thunderstorm came quickly and left just as fast. His grandfather looked at the umbrella in his hand and curiously asked how he had guessed it would rain. Alex smiled, not explaining the umbrella's origin. He said not to treat him like a child anymore. He was very thorough in everything he did now. He hung the umbrella outside the porch. After that, he followed his grandfather inside, beginning his precious vacation days with his family. That night, Alex and his grandfather had a few drinks. They talked about work and life. Since he had traveled all day, Alex went to sleep early. In the middle of the night, Alex vaguely heard crying outside the window. It sounded like a woman's voice, very mournful and desolate. Because he was too tired, he just thought it was the wind outside. After being in a daze for a while, he continued to drift off to sleep, completely unaware that danger was approaching. Before long, the crying grew louder. Furthermore, it seemed to be slowly approaching him, a very frightening feeling. Alex felt that something was wrong. Since the sound was clearly not the wind, he opened his eyes and his whole body stiffened. He couldn't believe it. A woman was standing right next to his bed. She was staring at him, a very horrifying and ghostly sight. Red tears continuously streamed from her eyes. Her mouth moved, repeating the same phrase. My death was too tragic. Alex was terrified. The hairs on his neck stood up. He wanted to struggle and sit up, but his body was like it was nailed to the bed. He couldn't move. In this way, Alex struggled in bed for a long time. After an unknown amount of time, the woman's crying suddenly stopped, which was very strange. He felt his legs loosen and the pressure on his hands disappeared. The feeling of being bound was gone. He immediately sat up. When he looked at the side of the bed again, the woman had disappeared without a trace, as if she had never been there, which was very strange. He was covered in cold sweat. He was completely exhausted, and his whole body was limp. He was very tired. The next day, Alex had a high fever. His entire body was hot, and he couldn't get up, a sudden fever of unknown origin. Alex felt it was related to the woman he had seen last night. He didn't dare to hide it and recounted the entire incident to his grandfather. His grandfather listened to Alex's story and didn't dare to delay. He immediately went out and looked for someone who could help his grandson, his heart filled with worry. Before long, he brought an old, gray-haired man into the house. The man was Joe Young, a respected figure in the village. Regarding his identity, the old man was named Joe Young. The villagers all called him Joe Young. He was the accountant for the village committee and was interested in studying yin and yang Taoist magic. The old man walked around the house and didn't seem to find anything unusual. Everything seemed very normal, with nothing suspicious. Therefore, he returned to Alex's bed. He bent down and gently asked if he had brought anything strange with him when he returned. Alex thought for a moment, listing his belongings one by one. He said that he hadn't brought much this time, only a few personal items. However, as Alex spoke and thought, he seemed to remember something else. His face was a little pale, a very important detail. Hearing this, Joe Young's face relaxed. However, his tone was very urgent, asking where that umbrella was now. At this moment, his grandfather spoke from behind him. He said that the umbrella was hanging outside the porch, right in front of the main door. There was nothing unusual about it. His grandfather then walked up to Alex and scolded him. He said that yesterday, Alex had lied that he had brought the umbrella with him. Seeing the situation, Joe Young quickly intervened. He told the grandfather to go find some yellow paper, saying that now was not the time to scold the boy. His grandfather listened and went inside to find the yellow paper. Joe Young turned around and comforted Alex, saying that nothing was wrong and that he should rest assured. After his grandfather finished preparing the yellow paper, Joe Young took the black umbrella hanging on the porch. The two of them then went into the mountain, looking very mysterious. The two of them went to a desolate valley. There was no one around for several miles, a very quiet and secluded place. Joe Young carefully placed the umbrella on the ground. He wanted to perform a ritual to solve the problem. After that, he found a heavy, round rock and placed it on top of the black umbrella. He did this to ensure that it could not move. Everything was prepared. Joe Young took out a round box, opened the lid, and inside was red cinnabar ink, a very important item. His grandfather saw it and asked if that wasn't the cinnabar ink that the villagers used to stamp their thumbprints. He didn't understand why Joe Young had brought this. Joe Young silently dipped his finger into the cinnabar ink. After that, he began to write something on the rock, a very mysterious act. After finishing writing, he signaled to his grandfather to quickly burn the yellow paper he had brought. The ritual was about to begin. The atmosphere became very solemn and mystical. After the yellow paper finished burning, Joe Young mumbled something. It seemed he was reciting some Taoist incantations, which were very mystical and solemn. After finishing a section of the incantation, Joe Young signaled to his grandfather to leave quickly. He said to go now and not look back. His grandfather was about to ask a question, but seeing Joe Young's serious face, he swallowed his words. He seemed a little nervous. He walked behind Joe Young. The two of them, one in front and one behind, walked out of the forest, not daring to say a word. The atmosphere was very tense. Just then, a cold gust of wind blew past them from behind. Vaguely, a woman's voice called out their names. It was very scary. The voice was very gentle, even a little seductive. His grandfather wondered why that voice knew his name and instinctively wanted to turn back to look. At this moment, Joe Young, who was walking in front, spoke up. He sternly said not to look back and to keep walking forward without hesitation. Joe Young's voice was firm and serious. His grandfather immediately abandoned the idea of turning back and continued to walk forward. The two of them walked a long distance. Only when the sound was no longer heard did Joe Young stop, breathing a sigh of relief. Joe Young's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He said that this feral demon was quite powerful, and if it were a normal person, their soul would have been taken away by it. At this moment, his grandfather remembered the woman's voice. He had almost turned back, a very risky and dangerous action. He also often heard people say that if an unclean spirit calls your name, don't answer, or your soul will be taken away. It was very scary. However, when it really happens, your body may not be able to resist the temptation. Thinking of this, He couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. The two of them then returned home. His grandfather saw Alex lying in bed and his face was much better, a welcome change. Joe Young went to Alex's bedside and started talking about the black umbrella. He said that there were two things you should never pick up on the road, and this umbrella was one of them. The umbrella was perfect for harboring spirits. Lonely feral spirits with nowhere to go would hide in the umbrella. Anyone who picked it up would be bringing a feral demon home. Alex heard this, and his scalp tingled. His eyes widened. He stammered, asking about the second thing that should not be picked up. He was full of confusion. The second item, of course, was money. This thing held an irresistible attraction for everyone, a great temptation. Some ill-intentioned people would take advantage of this. They would place money at a crossroads, waiting for someone to pick it up, a very malicious trap. If anyone picked it up, that money would either be used to buy their life or to ward off disaster. In short, anyone who picked it up would encounter misfortune.
I am an avid fisherman, spending almost all my free time on this hobby. I constantly challenge myself by fishing in various environments, from the sea, rivers, lakes, and reservoirs to streams, never growing tired of it. That day, a close friend who shared my passion, Ken, said he had found a fantastic spot and invited me to go with him to try it out. We packed our fishing gear, drove over 10 kilometers, then turned off the paved road onto a dirt path. As we continued driving into a village, I curiously asked Ken why this place was so deserted. Looking around, the village seemed abandoned. Ken explained that the area was being cleared for demolition and all the villagers had already moved away. In front of us were only crumbling walls, piles of bricks, and scattered debris. An eerie, desolate place where no one seemed to visit. At the edge of the village, there was a fairly wide river, an ideal fishing spot. Ken stopped the car at a slope, and the two of us stepped out. We then unloaded all our fishing gear from the car. Finding a relatively flat spot, we set up a sunshade and began fishing. I had to admit, the fish here were abundant. As soon as we cast our lines, we had bites immediately. Moreover, the first one I caught was a large fish, weighing over 4 kilograms. The bites kept coming, and I pulled in one fish after another, 7 or 8 in total. I was truly grateful to Ken for finding such an incredible place. While deeply engrossed in fishing, I suddenly felt the urge to relieve myself, so I deliberately walked away to find a secluded spot. In a place like this, there was certainly no public restroom available. I climbed up a small hill to see if I could find one in the village. Then, I made my way toward the village. I figured that some family's restroom might still be intact despite the demolition, so I started searching among the abandoned houses. As I walked along the street, a strange feeling crept over me. I felt as though someone was watching me. I turned toward the source of this unsettling sensation. Across the road, there was a courtyard enclosed by a high wall. Perched atop the wall was a child climbing up. We were only about 7 or 8 meters apart, yet I couldn't make out the child's face. I called out, asking what he was doing up there. I didn't think too much about it at the time and casually asked if there was a restroom nearby. But the moment I spoke, the child vanished right before my eyes. At first, I assumed he had simply jumped down to the other side of the wall, But then, something felt off. That wall was incredibly tall. How had the child climbed up in the first place? I even walked over and reached up with my hand. The wall was at least 1.5 times my height. However, since I urgently needed to relieve myself, I stopped thinking about it. I found an undisturbed restroom in a nearby yard and quickly did my business. When I returned to the riverbank, Ken complained that I had taken too long. I told him about the child climbing the wall, finding it quite odd, and pointed out that clearly someone was still living here. But Ken didn't believe me at all. He was certain that no one lived in this village anymore. We argued for a bit before deciding to go back to check the wall together. Ken agreed that, given the wall's height, the child would have to be unusually tall to climb up there. Ken theorized that maybe there was a ladder or something inside to climb on and suggested that I check it out. To confirm, Ken told me to step on his shoulders and climb up for a better look. With great effort, I finally managed to reach the edge of the wall. As I looked down, my skin crawled with goosebumps. There was no ladder, no foothold, nothing at all. The buildings inside had been mostly demolished, overgrown with weeds. There was no way anyone lived there. So what exactly was that child I had seen? I climbed down and described everything to Ken, but he dismissed it, saying I was overthinking and scaring myself unnecessarily. Hearing him say that, I felt I might have been too paranoid, so I followed him back to the riverbank. Not long after, I caught another fish. I unhooked it and placed it into the fish bag. Just as I was about to stand up, I accidentally caught a glimpse of the water's surface. Reflected in the river was the child from before, standing right behind me. Terrified, I screamed and spun around instantly, but there was nothing behind me. In my panic, I lost my balance and fell into the river. The river was deep. I struggled to stay afloat. Ken rushed to the edge, extending a fishing net toward me. I quickly grabbed it, and Ken pulled me to safety. Ken also noticed that something was seriously wrong. He knew I wasn't the type to be this careless. I told him about the child standing behind me, its reflection visible in the water. This time, Ken believed me. He thought I had genuinely encountered something supernatural. We didn't dare stay any longer and quickly drove away from that place. On the way back, even after changing into dry clothes, I couldn't stop shivering. This wasn't just a chill from the cold. It came from deep inside my bones, utterly inexplicable. For days afterward, I remained in this condition. While others wore light summer clothes in June and July, I had to bundle up, feeling unbearably cold. My mother suspected I had been haunted and sought out a spiritual master for help. Wanting to rid myself of this sensation, I went along with her. This may sound strange, but the moment I stepped into the spiritual master's house, the unbearable chill immediately left my body in an instant. In the room, an elderly man in his 50s sat on a heated brick bed. A table stood nearby, with several talismanic cards inscribed with strange symbols. The spiritual master explained that the child I had seen was a wandering spirit. It had no malicious intent. It had merely brushed past me by chance. He advised me never to fish in isolated places again and to always choose crowded areas filled with human energy. Ever since then, whenever I go fishing, I always pick spots where there are plenty of other anglers around, for safety.
This chilling tale unfolds in a small fishing village where life revolves around the daily catch. During the breeding season, it's customary for the local fishermen to dock their boats and strictly refrain from venturing out to sea. Yet, a man named Liu, always eager to earn a little extra cash, harbored a secret desire to stealthily take his small boat out under the cover of night. Liu was caught by the village chief, who sternly warned him against such foolishness. He cautioned Liu about the strict penalties for fishing during the restricted season, emphasizing the severe fines he'd face if caught. Liu ignored the warning, feigning engine repairs, and slipped away to the pier. Under the cloak of darkness, he hopped onto his boat, untied the anchor, leaving the village chief's warnings far behind. The motorboat silently glided away from the dock into the night. Liu lit a cigarette, a comfortable ease settling over him as he contemplated the money he was about to make. Liu cast a few nets in the nearby waters, hoping to snag some crabs, shrimp, and small fish. With his small boat, he dared not venture too far from shore. But the entire night passed, and when Liu pulled up his nets, they were empty. Not even a single crab's whisker could be found. Liu cursed under his breath, utterly frustrated by the futility of his trip. He figured he must have bad luck, and this reckless journey was all for nothing. Liu began to haul in his nets, preparing to turn the boat back. But then, a thick, impenetrable fog suddenly enveloped the sea. The dense mist swallowed everything, disorienting Liu completely. He was now surrounded by an all-encompassing white. Liu knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. He had to get back to shore immediately. Getting lost in the dark on a small boat with no communication equipment would lead to unimaginable consequences. Liu desperately tried to steer, but he couldn't see anything clearly. He could only rely on his instincts, steering blindly in one direction. Before Liu's eyes lay only thick fog, devoid of any reference points. He had been navigating for over an hour, and a chilling panic began to set in. By his reckoning, even if he hadn't reached the shore, he should have seen the lights from land by now. Yet, all that lay before him was the fog and the ceaseless sound of ocean waves. Liu's heart pounded in his throat. If his sense of direction was wrong, he might already be incredibly far from the coast. Just as Liu despaired, a faint silhouette of an island emerged from the dense fog directly ahead. Due to the darkness and the fog, Liu couldn't discern the island's full shape, but he was certain it wasn't the coast he'd departed from. Regardless, reaching land was better than drifting endlessly at sea. Liu decided to steer his boat straight onto the sandy beach. Upon reaching the island, Liu found a large rock to stand on, wanting to get a better view of where he had drifted. Liu felt a tremor of fear. He could tell this was a desolate, uninhabited island. Just as Liu shivered with fear, he vaguely heard a mournful song echoing from behind the island. The song was melancholic, carrying notes of sorrow and bitterness, yet it was hauntingly beautiful. It hung in the air over the deserted island. Liu had initially thought he was stranded on a deserted island, but hearing someone singing immediately brought a great sense of relief. He followed the sound of the singing and saw someone sitting on a large rock. Liu thought it was a long-haired woman. Liu was overjoyed, thinking he would finally find help. He quickly walked towards her, hoping to beg for some food. Liu greeted the woman and asked what island this was, explaining he was lost due to the sea fog, but the woman didn't respond. Liu spoke louder, asking if she could hear him. The woman still didn't react. Liu thought to himself, is she mute?
Liu took 2 more steps forward, and the woman stopped singing and slowly turned her head towards him. The moment the woman turned, Liu saw her face clearly. His blood ran cold with terror. It wasn't a girl in a green dress at all, but a green-skinned monster with sharp teeth. Its lower half was a massive fishtail. The monster snarled and lunged at Liu. He ran in sheer terror, desperately trying to dodge its sharp claws. The monster furiously dragged its body across the sand, pursuing Liu. Never had Liu felt such paralyzing fear. The monster couldn't walk, writhing its body as it crawled towards Liu. This was fortunate for Liu, for if they had been in the water, he would have been dead. He scrambled back into his boat, utterly exhausted, running in a panic. In Liu's mind, there was only one thought. He would rather die on the vast open sea than fall into the clutches of that monster. Liu's boat sped across the sea, desperately trying to escape the horrifying island. He could still hear the monster's piercing screams echoing from behind him. Liu steered his boat aimlessly until it ran out of fuel. He didn't know where he was going, and he didn't care. Liu simply drifted on the sea, without food, without water, and with no idea what would become of him. When he awoke from his delirium, the sound of ocean waves and birds flying in the sky roused Liu. After 7 days adrift, Liu was exhausted and desperate. He thought he was certainly going to die, but fortunately he spotted a cargo ship. Liu was rescued by the sailors on the cargo ship. They told him tales of the mermaid monster, which terrified him even more. After that harrowing experience, Liu sold his boat, switched to another profession, and never dared to venture out to sea again. The story of his encounter with the sea demon became a legend, recounted by many fishermen in the village to this day. This strange story took place in a remote riverside countryside where most of the inhabitants lived by fishing. In that region, there was a vast lotus pond, a place where old Zhao, a fisherman who had spent his entire life on the water, frequently went to make a living. It was a day in August, 1934. Old Zhao was rowing his small wooden boat to cast his nets as usual, but he had no idea that this day would be one he could never forget. For half the day, he cast dozens of nets but caught absolutely nothing. This left him deeply perplexed because no one knew these lotus waters better than he did. Normally, just a few casts would fill his basket with fish. However, today, the fish seemed to be fleeing from him. Feeling inevitably disappointed, old Zhao sighed softly and intended to pull in his nets to head home. At the very moment he was about to turn the boat around, a massive dark shadow suddenly glided across the water's surface from the side of the boat. That sudden appearance made old Zhao jump in terror. Although he could not see the shape clearly beneath the dark water, he could sense that the shadow was enormous. The dark shadow swam at extreme speed past the bottom of the boat and then darted straight into a dense patch of lotus. Old Zhao hurriedly leaned forward, trying to see clearly what it was. The mysterious creature moved through the water with an astonishing speed. Before he could get a clear look, the dark shadow completely vanished into the thick lotus. Having spent his whole life tied to this pond, old Zhao was confident he understood everything beneath its surface. But what he had just seen was completely beyond his understanding. His mind was in a daze, and he could only stare blankly toward the lotus patch. Its shape was not like a fish, but rather looked like a giant python. However, in this pond, even water snakes rarely appeared. How could there be such a massive python? After a moment of being stunned by shock, Old Zhao began to feel afraid. He hurriedly used all his strength to row the boat as fast as possible toward the shore. Yet, as he was rowing with all his might, a colossal force from beneath the water suddenly flipped the wooden boat right off the surface of the lake. The impact was so violent that it scared Old Zhao out of his wits. He completely lost his balance and tumbled into the cold water before he could react. As someone who had spent his life struggling with the river, he quickly held his breath to stabilize his body. Although visibility underwater was very limited, he remained extremely vigilant, fearing the creature would attack again. While he was focusing on observing his surroundings, a powerful surge of water rushed toward him, and a large dark shadow glided right past his back. Terrified, Old Zhao turned his head to look, but the creature moved too fast. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the deep, dark depths. Before he could regain his composure, the thing darted past his face once more. This time, although he couldn't see it in its entirety, he managed to catch a glimpse of its body. Its body was covered in a layer of hard scales. There appeared to be claws beneath its belly, and it had a tail that looked exactly like a fishtail. Overwhelmed by extreme fear and reaching the limit of his breath, he did not dare delay for another second and swam with all his strength toward the surface. Despite being an experienced fisherman, the series of horrors he had just endured caused him to choke on several large gulps of water before he could reach the surface to gasp for air. Fearing it would return, Old Zhao swam frantically toward the shore. Only when he crawled onto the dry land did his racing heart temporarily begin to calm down. He scrambled up in a panic, his limbs fumbling, and then ran for his life toward his house. Old Zhao's house was located on a small street along the north bank of the river, not far from that lotus pond. That night, upon returning home, Old Zhao began to run a persistent high fever. In his delirium, he kept mumbling about seeing a dragon, which made his wife extremely worried. His wife remembered how her husband had rushed back with a vacant expression. As soon as he collapsed onto the bed, he couldn't get back up and started burning with fever, which terrified her. By this time, Old Zhao had completely lost consciousness. His face was pale, and his body was as hot as a burning coal. The whole family gathered around the sickbed, everyone feeling anxious. They couldn't understand why a man who had gone to work healthy in the morning had suddenly fallen so ill. Seeing that the fever would not subside and that he remained unconscious, the family hurriedly sought help to take him to the district hospital amidst a torrential downpour. That night, it rained cats and dogs, as if the sky had been punctured by a giant hole, letting water pour down upon the mortal world. That same night, in another village not far away, a man named Liu was unable to go to his neighbor's house to chat as usual due to the heavy rain, so he prepared to go to bed early. While his wife was making the bed, Liu stood looking out the window at the rainy and windy night, mumbling his intention to draw the curtains and go to rest. However, just as he stepped to the window and reached out his hand to pull the curtain, he happened to glance outside. That brief glance left Liu frozen in amazement. According to his later account, at that moment, he saw a dragon-like creature soaring into the sky from the direction of the lotus pond to the west of the village. Just as it lunged into the air, a clap of thunder shook the heavens, accompanied by a blinding lightning bolt that struck directly at the creature.
The creature tried its best to evade, twisting and turning amidst the storm, but the lightning and thunder seemed to have eyes, pursuing it relentlessly. Stunned by the extraordinary sight before his eyes, he hurriedly called his wife to come and see. His wife thought her husband was playing a pointless joke, but because of his attitude, she walked to the window despite her annoyance. However, when the couple looked out again, the sky held nothing but a white shroud of rain and flashes of lightning. Absolutely nothing else could be seen. Liu couldn't help but wonder. In just a blink of an eye, the dragon that was struggling to dodge the lightning had completely vanished. His wife grumbled and went to sleep first, leaving him standing dazed by the window. He began to doubt himself, wondering if he had truly seen a dragon or if his eyes had deceived him. The heavy rain lasted continuously for several days before it finally stopped, and the sky gradually brightened again. As soon as the rain ceased, the villagers gathered in large numbers, everyone buzzing with talk about how they had seen a dragon on that stormy night. One man in the village claimed that the dragon seemed to want to fly into the sky at all costs, but every time it lunged upward, it was struck down by lightning. He recounted that he had personally seen it persistently fly up 7 or 8 times, but in the end, it was still knocked back down by the heavenly thunder. Some villagers speculated it was a giant serpent that had cultivated its spirit and was about to transform into a dragon, trying to overcome its tribulation to fly to heaven, but unfortunately meeting with divine punishment. However, the majority did not agree with that opinion. They insisted it was truly a dragon, and they even described in detail the shape of its head and claws. Regarding this falling dragon event, there was another witness who approached it at a very close range, Old Wang from a nearby village. Old Wang recalled those days of relentless rain that had flooded all the fields and gardens. As soon as the rain stopped, he hurriedly carried his hoe to the field to drain the water, hoping to save some of the crops. His path to the field passed by a lotus pond. When he got close to the shore, he suddenly heard low, muffled cries coming from inside, sounding exactly like the lowing of a cow. Being a kind-hearted man, Old Wang thought perhaps someone's cow had wandered off and got stuck in the lotus pond. So he parted the thick lotus plants to go in and check. He followed the cries and drew near, and a terrifying sight met his eyes. In a muddy pit, a strange creature was lying there. Having lived more than half his life, Old Wang had never seen an animal with such a strange shape. Trying to steady his nerves, he held his hoe high and cautiously approached closer, wanting to see clearly what this creature was. Upon getting close, Old Wang could not help but shiver in horror. The creature had horns on its head, a long snake-like body covered in scales, 4 claws underneath that looked like chicken feet, and a mane on its back like that of a horse. Its tail looked like a fish's tail. A foul, pungent stench rose from the creature as it lay gasping in the mud pit. A powerful shock welled up inside Old Wang. He wondered if this was the dragon of legend. Looking at the legendary creature dying before him, its body riddled with bleeding wounds that attracted swarms of flies, Old Wang was extremely conflicted, not knowing what the right thing to do was. It was August, and the sun was as fierce as pouring fire. This dragon was severely injured and exposed to the sun. If a solution wasn't found soon, he feared it would not survive. He hurriedly ran back to the village to call for help. Hearing that a dragon was trapped, everyone excitedly ran to assist, some carrying water, others cutting large branches to provide shade for it. At that time,
The dragon was considered a sacred beast, bringing good omens, so the villagers were extremely enthusiastic. Even the laziest people in the village were eager to carry water. According to the elders, the villagers used mats and tree branches to build a shelter, then took turns scooping water to pour over the dragon's body so its flesh would not dry up. However, all efforts seemed to yield no results. The dragon remained motionless, and the stench grew heavier by the day. Some people sighed, saying the dragon had violated heavenly laws and was punished by heaven, so there was no way to save it. Despite this, many villagers still knelt and prayed every day, hoping the blue sky would show mercy, and there were even monks who came to perform rituals for the sacred creature. The villagers believed that the consecutive storms were the tribulations caused by this dragon, but seeing it covered in wounds, they still sincerely prayed for its recovery. A strange thing happened. The sky had only been sunny for a short while before it suddenly turned gloomy. Dark clouds rolled in along with the rumbling of thunder, signaling an impending deluge. Seeing the heavy rain about to fall, the villagers who were helping had to stop. They did not understand what the will of heaven was, and they feared those earth-shattering lightning bolts would strike again and involve them. Everyone began to disperse, and the rain arrived immediately, leaving the giant creature lying alone in the muddy puddle in the lotus pond. That year, it rained an unusually large amount, and this particular storm, once it started, lasted for 2 days and nights. This time, although the rain poured down violently, there was absolutely no more thunder or terrifying lightning like before. 2 days later, the rain finally stopped and the sky became clear. Still worried about the dragon, as soon as the rain ceased, the villagers flocked to the lotus pond to see how it was doing. However, when they arrived, the dragon had completely vanished, leaving only a deep indentation in the ground, evidence of where it had once lain. The branches and mats that the villagers had used to provide shade earlier lay scattered to one side. While examining the area, a villager picked up a large piece of material from the mud pit that looked exactly like a dragon scale. That piece of scale was transparent like sparkling crystal. When held up to the sunlight, it even displayed brilliant pentachromatic halos. Unfortunately, later when he moved house, the scale was lost. This event subsequently became a center of attention, covered extensively by domestic and foreign media under the name the Falling Dragon Incident. This news once shocked the whole world, and many people traveled long distances to see the dragon skeleton with their own eyes. However, many years later, biologists concluded that it was merely the skeleton of a stranded whale, and the dragon horns were due to an error during the assembly of the bones. Regardless of how science explains it, in the memories and hearts of the local elders, the falling dragon event of that year remains an obvious and mysterious truth.